The ghosts in my house have taken to talking. Just the other night, I woke with a strange feeling. Someone had been talking, and that's what woke me up. You've all had that experience. My mind was telling me that it was true. Someone had been talking to me. Alone at night, I can hear people whispering to each other. There is definitely more than one voice, which scares me, for it leads me to believe that there is more than one ghost. I'm Wiccan, and we Wiccans believe heavily in a spirit world, but we believe that the spirits are nothing to fear. But tell that to my friend. He has always been able to sense and see spirits, a gift he does not consider a gift. I don't think the boy has had a good night's sleep in a long time. One night, he was walking past my house when he saw a woman dressed in white standing on my front porch. He called out, thinking it might be my mom, or at least a relative. He almost ran when the woman turned to face him. She stared back at him with what he described as red eyes, as if that wasn't enough for him. He just had to tempt fate, and he walked past the front porch towards my back gate. He told me he looked in my backyard and saw at least 3 more ghosts wandering, with a 4th leaning against my pool. I heard someone frantically knocking at my back door. When I let him in, I saw a long scrape on his left arm. I asked him what happened, and all he could say was it was the lady on the front porch. I looked out and saw nothing there. By the time I came back to the kitchen, he had calmed down enough to tell me all that he saw. The ghost had also seemed to have a playful side, and I often see my kitten playing with them. You can see her chasing something that isn't there at least once a day. As soon as she gets under my bed, she will come out racing, butt tucked under, running away from whatever she was chasing. Now, I'm not Christian, nor do I believe in the Christian notions of God or Satan. I've tried several times to expel the spirits myself, but to no avail. It only seems to make them more active, but perhaps it's time for me to suck it up and call in a priest. As a wedding gift in November 1980, we received a house from my husband's parents. The house was located in Puerto Rico. It was a standard 3-bedroom cement house on about a 1/4 acre of land. The house had belonged to my husband's paternal grandmother. It was furnished with lovely antique furniture. The master bedroom was too small for our needs, so we doubled down the size of it and added on a master bathroom. Before I moved to the house, I knew that my husband's uncle had died in the backyard of the house. He had a major heart surgery and had been recuperating at home. According to my husband, he was very stubborn and bored from over a month of total bed rest. So when his sister, who was a nurse, left to do some shopping, he got out of bed and went into the backyard to do some gardening, which is where she found him dead about 3 hours later. He died of internal bleeding from the surgery. Since the house originally belonged to the grandmother and the uncle had died with no direct hire, the house had not been lived in for about 4 years until the estate was settled. We actually were the first people to live in the house after his death. I thought it was kind of a tragic story, but thought nothing of it. Part of the remodeling of the house was all new plumbing, and a new electrical system to accommodate all the new electrical stuff most modern households have. Among the things we changed were the light switches from the old-fashioned click kind to the new silent ones. We had been living in the house about 2 months when it happened. I woke up to the slam of the screen door in the kitchen. I looked at the digital clock, which read 11:30 p.m. At first I thought it might be a robber, but we had iron gates on all the windows and chains on the front iron gate door to the carport, which is where this person was coming in from. I was sure I would have heard something before this if it was a break-in, unless the person had a key. I thought maybe my father-in-law had an argument with his wife and came to sleep in our guest room. Anyway, this is what I heard. The screen door in the kitchen slammed shut. I heard the click of the light switch in the kitchen. I heard that switch click off, and then the hall switch click on. I heard footsteps down the hall into the original bathroom that was halfway down the hall to our bedroom. Then I heard the click of the bathroom light, and the water turned on in the sink. The person did not apparently bother to close the bathroom door. Then I heard the water turned off, and the bathroom light was clicked off, and footsteps towards our door, and a click as the hall light was turned off. Here's where I realized this was not my father-in-law. When he turned off the hall light, I suddenly realized there was no light coming in under our bedroom door. I remember that our light switches didn't make the clicking sound anymore. The doorknob to our bedroom door turned the door open, and the click of the light being turned on, except the light didn't turn on. There was a full moon, so I could see clearly, and there was nothing to see. The footsteps went towards the original closet. The hanger started rattling. Then the footsteps came towards the bed, and he sat down on the edge of the bed. I saw the indentation on the bed, on my side. I heard shoes being taken care of. I heard him get up and put the shoes in the closet. He came back to the bed and sat down again. I saw the indentation in the mattress, and that was enough for me. Before this thing climbed into bed with me, I climbed over my husband to the other side of the bed and turned on the bedside lamp. This is when my husband woke up. He saw me standing next to him, with my eyes glued to the other side of the bed, where I had clearly seen the indentation of a body lying on the bed next to him until I turned on the light. Then nothing. He said, "What's the matter? You look like you've seen a ghost." I said, still staring at the other side of the bed, "I think your uncle just came home." At this time, he turned pale and jumped out of bed to stand next to me and said, "What do you mean?" I explained to him what I described above. At this point, we both decided that perhaps we had not picked the best location for the bed, and that it would be better off located against the wall of the new part of the bedroom. So, we dismantled our king-size bed and put it back together against the wall of the new part of the bedroom. Neither of us slept very well the rest of that night, even though nothing else happened that night. After that, occasionally, either he or I would hear the clicking and the footsteps, etc., but at least he didn't sit or lie down on our bed anymore. That is my ghost story. I guess it all started when I was in the 4th grade. We had bought a rest or bar, and it sat on approximately 4 to 5 acres. The basement of this bar had rooms that were all different heights, and they had all dirt floors. I never felt very comfortable there. We had built a condo above the rest, and lived there until I was 16. One day, my cousin came over, and we were bored. We had no idea what to get into, so we decided to go dig in the basement to see if we could find anything interesting. The two of us each took a stick and started digging in opposite directions. All of a sudden, we heard this high-pitched woman scream. We looked at each other, didn't say a word, and took off running upstairs to the bar. We went up to our barmaid and asked if she had heard anything. She said no, but the TV turned off by itself. A few months went by, and the phone in the bar would just fly off the wall by itself. Then my father was down in the basement one day, and there was this one room he was trying to get into. He had to crawl in the dirt to get in, and once he was in there, he found a pair of shackles. The rumor is this rest was built where they used to have an underground railroad for slaves. A few years later, my dad decided to subdivide and build us a house on this property. He had done construction all of his life, so as they laid the foundation, they had to let it sit overnight. The next day, the foundation collapsed for no reason at all. No one had an explanation for it. They encountered many problems building the house. Once it was completed, I was 16, and we moved in. The first week in there, I would sit in my bedroom petrified to leave the room, because I would see a shadow peek around the corner, and no one else was home. One night, my ex-husband was in there, and he woke me up in the middle of the night to every appliance in the kitchen going off. The cabinets were opening and shutting, so we got up to see what exactly was happening, and as we turned the corner to walk in the kitchen, it stopped, and everything was in its place. My mom was on the other side of the house, and we would hear things in the middle of the night being picked up and thrown across the basement floor. But one of the scariest things that's ever happened to me was I was sleeping, and in my dream, I was looking out a front bay window, and I saw this smoke, and it was actually a spirit, and it jumped into my body. I saw my mother walk by, and tried to scream, and couldn't say anything. I tried to wake myself up from this dream, and couldn't. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, I woke up and called my mother. We had 2 separate phone numbers inside the house, and made her come sleep in my room because I was too scared. I had some other strange things happen, but these were the scariest. In 1955, my mother was basically forced by my doctor to take me to Puerto Rico to live for 1 year because of my poor health. He told my parents that if I passed one more winter in New York City, I would probably die. I went to live with my mother in Las Piedras, Puerto Rico, at my cousin's house Finding, not her real name. Generally, it was wonderful. It was the first year of my life that I could remember where I didn't get asthma. Finning was one of the nicest people you ever want to meet. Finning was in the process of converting her wooden house into a cement house, and due to this, did not yet have indoor plumbing, which meant she had an outhouse. This was my big problem, the outhouse. I hated the outhouse. It was smelly, full of bugs, and worst yet, had no electricity. As luck would have it, I got sick to my stomach and had dysentery, requiring many trips to the outhouse with an oil lamp in hand. It was late at night, everyone was asleep, and I was once again for what seemed 100th time back in the outhouse. Let me describe it. It was basically 9 sheets of tin, 2 on each side nailed onto wooden beams that made a frame, 1 piece of tin serving as a door on hinges with a slide lock, and a piece of tin also served as a roof, with a hole in the ground, some cement blocks on top of a cement floor, approximately the height of a normal toilet with a toilet seat on top. The light from the oil lamp was dim, leaving many corners in the outhouse dark. Being a child of 6, I could imagine spiders and water bugs and such, hiding in the dark corners, waiting for the light to go out so they could eat me. To say I was nervous was putting it mildly. I was being brave about it, and I refused to use a chamber pot like a baby. I got sick if I had to clean it, and I didn't want my mother to have to deal with the mess either, so I sat there listening to the all-night bugs. In a healthy tropical environment, there are lots of creepy crawlies, bugs, lizards, worms, frogs, and spiders. Suddenly, there was complete silence. My first thought was what in the world happened to the bugs. Then to my right, seemingly far away, I heard step dragging and the rattling of chains. I thought how weird. It sounded like someone is dragging something with chains on it, or that something is attached to, oh no, their leg. It's a convict. I'd seen a movie where these men were dressed in these black and white striped pajama things, and they had a ball and chain attached to their leg, so they couldn't run away. I remember thinking when I saw the movie that they must have been really evil men to deserve such horrible treatment. At this point, I decided it was time to scream for my mom, but I couldn't. I was frozen in place. I couldn't move anything, and my voice seemed to have disappeared as well. I kept screaming Mom, Mom in my mind, but my mouth didn't even open. As the convict got closer step drag, I was overcome with feelings of anguish and extreme terror. My body began to shake uncontrollably, and sweat poured down my body along with tears from my eyes. But I couldn't get my stupid body to move. The convict was now right outside the door of the outhouse, and I heard a soft sob. Then, another along with heavy labored breathing. The convict was crying, and apparently exhausted from the sound of his breathing. Then I felt a wave of overpowering sadness and despair. The convict kept going off, to my left step drag. The sound continued fading away to my left, until it seemed like he was very far away. Suddenly, all the normal night noises returned along with my ability to move, and best of all, scream. And scream I did, over and over again, until I heard my mother's voice outside the outhouse door. I opened the door and jumped into my mother's arms, hysterically crying. Mom, did you hear him? Did you see him? My mother was trying to calm me down. I didn't normally become hysterical over nothing. My mother said, see who? Hear who? The convict with the ball and chain. My mother said, who had a ball and chain? I said the convict. He was right over outside the outhouse, in our backyard. He was crying. Didn't you hear him? I neglected to mention that my screaming woke up the whole neighborhood, and everyone was crowding around my mother and me, trying to figure out who was trying to kill me, considering how distraught I was, when our next door neighbor hearing me said, "Oh, you heard our neighborhood ghost. What a privilege." I thought, privilege? Ghost. Did he say ghost? Is he crazy? I was scared enough when I thought I was a living, breathing human being, never mind a ghost. I was definitely never going in this backyard again at night. Then he told me this story. When Puerto Rico was under the Spanish government, they built the railroad, but they didn't have enough laborers, so they used prisoners. They put balls and chains on them so they couldn't get away, and if they tried, they could easily track them down and shoot them as an example to the rest. Despite this, many tried to escape because it was either escape or die because of the harsh treatment they received. The people in the neighborhood, who had been privileged to see or hear him, believed this man did not know he was dead and was still trying to get home to his family. When he said this, I suddenly understood all the feelings I got. The sadness, despair, anguish, and overpowering terror were not really mine but his, and he had somehow communicated them to me. I think he must have finally found his way home, because no one has heard him in years. I just wanted to let you all know of an experience I had while staying in the Manager Hotel in San Antonio, Texas in July 2002. I was staying at the hotel for a Courts Reporters convention. I had just arrived at a hotel during a late afternoon. My friend came down to meet me in an area close to the parking garage. As we were about to enter the hotel lobby from a long hallway entrance, I saw a man approaching us coming from the opposite direction, so that he would have to pass by him face to face. He had caught my eye from a distance because of the way he was walking, almost unaware of his surroundings, but also walking as if he might have been a manager of some type. That is the feeling I got from his walk. I could see that he was a very tall man as he approached. He wore a dark suit and had red hair with spectacle glasses on and an old-fashioned curly mustache. As he approached, I became a little scared, but decided that as we passed each other, I would just look up into his eyes. When we passed each other, he did look at me, very slowly turning his head, and gave a slow nod and faint smile. I asked my friend who also saw him if he had gotten a weird feeling when she passed him, and she agreed that she had. I asked the front desk agent a little later, nonchalantly, if a costume party or reenactment of some sort had taken place that day in the area, and if they had a manager that fit the man's description. I received a resounding no to all my questions. I did not want to tell them that I thought I'd seen a ghost, as I knew that the hotel is known for sightings, but I was not going to acknowledge anything of the sort. My friend and I were staying on the historic side of the hotel. Our room was freezing for all the nights we spent at the hotel, and we could not adjust the temperature. I had bought a whisker basket of fruit and snacks for us to nibble on, and set it on the bureau in our room. Early in the morning, I was awoken by the sound of the whisker basket being moved or trying to be picked up. The sharp sound of the wicker weaving is what I heard. I would not look over at the basket. I did note that my friend was in bed asleep and could not have moved the basket. I remember exiting the hotel doors, which are plated with brass and are very heavy, and they started moving to open seconds before I put my hands on them, but I know they moved. Then, I came back to my room and took a shirt off and placed it on the doorknob of the bathroom. When I got back to the room and having gone swimming, my shirt had been moved to the edge of my bed, and we had already had maid service that day and did not require anything new from housekeeping, and my friend had not been back to the hotel room. Then, that night, I was on my way down to the lobby desk to find out about checkout time for the next day. I decided to take the stairs instead of the elevator. As I looked over the mezzanine to the other side, nobody was there. Then, in a matter of seconds, I looked again, and there was the same man I had seen the previous day, standing on the edge of the railing, immediately catching my eye with his stare and smile, and lifted his eyebrows up at me as if he was flirting. I remember feeling scared, and at the same time, disappointed, because I liked him better when I had passed him by in the hallway the previous day, and he had just given me a nod. It was the same person I'd seen the day before, with the same suit on and same glasses, and same mustache. So who was this mysterious figure in the hotel, and why did he want my attention so bad? I know it seemed like he was flirting with me, but I'm really not entirely sure. If anyone has any questions about this ordeal, please let me know. I'm very interested in the paranormal, and I want to know further about the situation. I recently found your website while researching the technology of ghost hunting for a university project, and noticed your email address for real-life ghost accounts. This is a description of something that happened whilst I was away at college in London, England, and this is really the reason I became interested in the supernatural. I'm afraid I don't have any photographs or anything. I went to college to study theater, stage management, and technical stuff like lighting and sound at a place called Mount View Conservatory for the Performing Arts in North London. It is very old, probably mid to late Victorian, owned by an entrepreneur who turned it into a theater school back to the 1950s, I believe. Originally, it was only used for private classes for 2 or 3 people, but over the years it has been built up, with later parts of the building added onto the structure of the original house. For example, the main theater is called the Mount View and was stuck directly onto the facade of the house, covering what was the front garden, and a tree growing up through that garden still grows through the stage left wing. They simply built the theater around it. The other theater, simply a black, box-shaped room that could be adapted to any sort of play or stage shape just by setting up decking, was called the Judi Dench, named after the actress who was one of the sponsors. There's a narrow corridor between the two, with the dressing rooms on one side, used by both theaters, and with a door on each end, and the workshops for props and model making on the other. The building here is quite old and rickety, complete with creaky floorboards. The incident I remember most, there were actually several weird ones, was at the beginning of my second year, around late July. I was the company stage manager for a production of the Judi Dench. We ran our own shows in the second year, as though we were a professional company, and so, as CMM, one of my jobs was to open up the theater first thing in the morning and get it ready for the actors and crew. I had to unlock the doors, starting with the lighting box for the Judi Dench, as unlocking this door also switched off the silent motion detector alarm inside the theater. I was the only one from our company to be in that morning, arriving just before 8 a.m. The duty member of staff opened the front door and went to turn off the alarm in the Mount View, while I went off to see to the Judi Dench. I was going through the corridor from the Mount View and was heading for the lighting box to turn off the alarm when I heard someone walk across the stage area. It was totally dark, as you have to get into the box to turn the lights on as well, so I didn't see who it was, but I heard them go up the small flight of steps leading up to the dressing room corridor, and the dressing room door slammed. It was very quiet, with no one else around yet, and the sounds were quite clear. At first, I thought one of the actors must have got in via the dressing rooms, which could have been open from the Mount View side, had got onto the stage, and then realized that the alarm was still on, so had run to get out. I opened the box and put on the lights, and then went to find the staff member to tell him, in case the alarm had tripped and the police were on their way. Before heading back to the Mount View side of the building, I went to check the dressing rooms first to make sure they were all unlocked. When I got there, they were all still locked, including the one I had heard close, and when I later found the staff member, I was told that no one had been in the dressing rooms, and that there was in fact no one else in the building either. I know this sounds ridiculous, and to begin with, I thought I must have been tired, having worked till 11 p.m. the night before, but later, I was talking to one of the other students who was working on another production. She told me that once, while working late in the props room, she had heard someone pacing up and down in the corridor, the same one that runs by the Judi Dench. She had been so annoyed by this disturbance that she had told the duty staff member off for it when they were leaving at the end of the night. There was only the two of them in the building that night, and according to the lecturer, he had been in the office at the opposite end of the building all night, surfing the net. Another older student later asked me, when we were talking about our experiences, if there was an acoustic piano being played in the show I was working on. When I said yes, she just nodded, as though this explained everything. Whether this is true or not, I don't know, but the older girl said that this sort of thing happened often when there was a real piano being played, as opposed to electric clairvoyance being used for the show. Apparently, this house was originally used at the turn of the century It's a private girls' boarding school. One of the girls was allegedly found dead on the front lawn, as though she had fallen through the upstairs window, but there was no explanation of how she ended up there. That window, a bay window, is still visible, incorporated into the brickwork in the Mountain Theater, in the stage right wing and above prompt corner, where the deputy stage manager sits, due to cue the show. According to the other students, several of them felt as though they were being watched while they were cueing a show, and the effect is always said to be heightened when there is piano music. They say that the girl liked to play the piano. Again, I have to say that I've never seen anything substantial, beyond a sort of grayish shadow once in one of the wings, and I've never seen any actual reports of the girl's death, like newspaper clippings, etc. But there's definitely something odd about the whole building. One student described it as sick, but after the boarding school moved out, the building was used as a hospital for shell-shocked patients during and after World War I, so there could be many explanations for the noises and feelings. I just found your website and find it fascinating. I lived in the same house for 44 years in New Paltz, New York. I'm convinced that there are spirits in the house. Here are a few stories. I always had a very uncomfortable feeling about a particular room in the house. I was less than 3 years old when my grandfather took an overdose of a diabetes medication, disturbances. It had just come out. He took about 60 pills in an hour because he forgot he took them. My mother found him unconscious in that room. He died a few days later because when they pumped his stomach, an ulcer ruptured and he bled to death. My father was ill for 8 years with a neurological disease, Steele-Richardson syndrome. The VA provided a hospital bed when he was home. He was in that room. Several years later, my sister was ill with cancer. She was in that room and died in that bed. A year later, my mother, who was also ill with cancer, was in that room. She died in that bed. I kept hearing noises in the house. I would be downstairs, and the only one home. I could hear movement upstairs, like someone else was there. My mother and I had a habit of watching the 11 o'clock news, and then going to bed. One night, I was on one side of the living room, and got up to turn off the TV at 11:30. I saw a small circle of light at the bottom of the TV stand. When I got to the TV, it was as if an invisible wall went up. I was only about 2 to 3 inches from the TV knobs, but until that light went away, I could not reach them. It must have been my mother. A few days earlier, my friend and I were sitting in the living room across from each other talking. All of a sudden, he got a strange look on his face. He saw a small ball of light move just off the floor near the fireplace in the other side of the room, and then disappear. About 2 years before my sister died, she went on a Trey's Dies weekend and got a cross. It was on one of her dressers in my brother's room. I had a tenant in my sister's room. He thought he heard someone come in earlier, but was not sure. The house was on the market and repairs were being made. We went upstairs, and I instinctively flipped on the switch that turned the light on in the room. The light went on, so we realized it had been the repairman. My tenant noticed the cross and suggested we bring it downstairs. I took his advice and hung it on the mirror on the opposite wall of the death room. That cross moved for 4 hours non-stop that night. Sometimes it will move up and down, like on a heartbeat. Sometimes it will move side to side, like a pendulum. That cross still moves to this day. I took it with me when I moved to Colorado 3.5 years ago. It has nothing to do with any kind of draft, open window, etc. I firmly believe my sister is still with me. Also ghost related is the story of my father. He died February 18th, 1981. It rained the day of his funeral. It rained on the way to the funeral home. It stopped so we could go inside. It rained while we were inside. It stopped so we could come out. It rained on the way to the church. It stopped so we could go inside. It poured like no tomorrow, all through Mass. It stopped so we could come out. It rained on the way to the cemetery. and you get the idea. It started again when we left. From that day on, till I moved in 1999, if I went to the cemetery in the rain, it would rain on the way up, stop while I was there, and start again when I left. My girlfriend witnessed this one night, and it freaked her out. She thought I was joking. Here's a story about my mother. She always promised me she would come back and help me if she could after she died. Well, she died on a Wednesday morning. I had to drive up to northern New Jersey Thursday night to pick up my brother and sister-in-law for the funeral. I forgot to gas up on the way out of New Jersey. I looked at my gas gauge after I passed the rest stop between Newborough exit and the New Paltz exit on the New York State Freeway. I had less than an eighth of a tank of gas. I asked Mom to get me home. I hit empty about 2 to 3 miles before the exit. I pulled into the gas station across the exit on fumes. To this day, I've not run out of gas. I do not make it a habit of waiting until I am empty to fill up. I believe she is still with me and watching over me. After the death of my sister and my mother, I was so devastated, I tried suicide. I took some pills and put a frozen solid piece of London broil in tomato sauce. I checked it after an hour or so and found it had not cooked much. I took some more pills and decided to turn it off in an hour or so. I woke up 10 hours later to go to work. The gas was off. It was charcoal when I lifted the lid. The next day, my supervisor told me my mother had come to her and told her to tell me she came down and turn off the gas so nothing would happen to me. Before I explain what happened, it would probably make more sense to describe my situation. I'm a 20-year-old male living in a city on the northern western shore of Lake Superior called Thunder Bay. Me and my 2 brothers were not living with my parents, who were separated at the time. Instead, my brothers, both of which were younger, one was 15 and the other was 17 when I was 18, lived with my aunt as foster children, and I lived on my own. We were just getting closer to my mom, and we paid a visit to her every weekend. One week, she decided that she was going to go on a fishing trip. My mom and her boyfriend invited me and my brothers, but I decided not to go. A choice that may have saved my life, or led half my family into an early grave, because the only one to survive the trip was my youngest brother. Before they left, my other uncle, who lives downstairs from the aunt and uncle my brothers were living with, saw Andrew and said that he looked almost colorless or gray and that something was very wrong. He didn't mention it after it happened because it didn't make any sense to him at the moment. During the trip, they went fishing and the boat they were in flipped over. They all drowned except my youngest, who made it to shore by hanging onto the boat. Now that you know the history, this is where things started to get weird. Since I stayed at the home during the trip, I had no idea what happened. My aunt and uncle drove my brother home after the ordeal that night, but I wasn't told about it until the next morning. But that same night, when he went home, my alarm clock fell to the floor. Now that may not sound strange, but it was not close to the edge, and there was no way that I could have pulled it down since the cord was leading away from the bed. After the funeral, my uncle, the one who lived downstairs from them, started seeing the brother who died standing in the door of his room at the corner of his eye. He would turn that way, but no one was there. My uncle was not one who would lie about something like that or sees things that aren't there, so I believe him totally. About a month or 2 after his death and my mother's death, I moved in with my fiance downstairs from her parents. I needed to get surgery to fix my nose and take my tonsils out at the same time. My fiance drove me to the hospital on the day of the surgery, and I suddenly felt sad because I knew my mother wouldn't be able to be there for me. I went into the OR and obviously didn't stay awake for it. My fiance, however, sat outside the doors to the hall that led to the OR, which was pretty close to her. I was taking abnormally long to finish, which my fiance should know since she is a nurse, and was getting worried when she saw a lady in purple walk to the door of my room. My fiance does not make up stories and is very reliable, but she still swears that it was my mother. Before she entered my room, She turned and smiled at my fiance, then went in. A few minutes later I came out, but my mother wasn't seen again. When I came to, I was told by the doctor that they had trouble bringing me back from the anesthetic. Maybe that's why my mom was there. More things happened, like a clear knocking on our door, but no one is there, and other things similar. We aren't the only ones who experienced this. My aunt had new foster kids after my surviving brother moved out, 2 girls and 1 boy. The 2 girls slept in my brother's old room and were so terrified that they wanted their brother to sleep in there with them. The next morning, after he slept in that room, he told my aunt that he couldn't sleep very well. When asked why, he said that his sisters kept hearing things and waking him up. He also told her that his sister saw a boy. We think it might have been my brother, but who knows? I haven't experienced much since, and my experiences might seem insignificant to some, but for me, it's kinda creepy. That's my story. I hope it gets to you okay this time, without half the story disappearing. My name is Erica, and I had an experience once at a dorm I was staying in over the weekend. I was 17 or 18, I'm not too sure now. I'm from El Paso, Texas, and I was staying at the University of Texas at El Paso. Now, I'd never really heard about anything strange going on at these dorms we were staying at until my experience was shared. I was coming to the end of a very long day. I'd woken up early around 5 a.m. to get ready for the science fair. No, that isn't the reason for going to the university, but it is part of the story. I went to the science fair and was there almost all day. I ended around 3 in the afternoon. I was in a rush to finish because I was meeting my friends at UTEP to begin another season of the Young Leaders Conference. I was very excited to see all my friends, but I was also very tired. The conference went underway and it finished into the night, as it always had every year. By the time we did room check, I was extremely exhausted. I was a counselor at the time, so we did room check, and then all of us were going to hang out that night on the floor above to eat pizza and see how everyone was. I was rooming with my best friend named Veronica. She came in, let me know where everyone was going to meet, and if I was interested in pitching in for pizza. I told her that I was too exhausted to eat, and that I just thought it'd be best to go straight to bed. I told her that she could go on without me, and if she wouldn't mind being very quiet when she came in, so she would not wake me. She was fine with that, and said she would see me in the morning, and asked me to wake her up when I got up the next day. I agreed and went to sleep. I have to explain to you the way the dorm room looked. When you walked into the room, the beds were against the wall, on the same wall. They were parallel to the wall, and the only thing between them was a sink. All the closets and cabinets were on the opposite side of the room. When I slept, I put my head towards the door and my feet towards the window. There was a window on the opposite side of the room from the floor. I enjoyed sleeping in that bed every year because I liked looking out the window. The whole room was dark and I was getting pretty sleepy. I guess I must have gotten to the point where I was finally asleep when things started to happen. I remember that I heard the cabinet door open and slam shut. I really didn't think much of it because I just figured that Veronica came in and the door of the cabinet must have slipped from her hands and slammed shut. I started to get to sleep when I heard the closet door open and shut again. I wasn't agitated, but I forgave her again for it. Finally, the sink light came on. As soon as that happened, I heard the cabinet and closet doors opening and shutting quite fast. Then that the lights for the entire room came on. All this noise at once was just enough to drive me crazy. I finally got fed up with it, so I sat up and yelled towards the window, "Viral, will you knock it off? I'm trying to get some sleep, and I thought I'd ask you to please be quiet when you came in." At that moment, all the lights went off, and the sink water stopped running. There was no way for all those things to have turned off on their own, all at once, unless there was more than one person in the room. But the funny thing was, now that I realize it, there were no sounds of footsteps. About a half an hour later, Veronica walked back into the room. I'd asked her if she had been in that room just a while back, and her and another friend confirmed to me they had just come back so they could go to bed. This other friend was just walking her back. I never told Vera what happened that night. I never really told anyone about it until I started hearing other people with their own stories. I know for a fact now that someone died in those dorms. I don't know why or how, but I do know that they don't house students in those dorms anymore. I still think about it to this day and wonder what that lonely student wanted. Was I in their room, or did they just feel like causing some hell and annoying me? I guess I'll never know. Wow, I never thought I would tell this story on the net. I'm not even sure of how to type it because it was just so real. Let's see. I was maybe 16 or 17 years old. My grandfather had passed away months before my grandma. He died en route to the hospital, and my mom was with my grandma at the time. Anyway, my grandmother was having a very difficult time with his loss and had become very distant to everyone. It was all we could do to keep her company and try to keep her on the mind, on the present, and not the past. My mother was constantly trying to get us kids over to see her and keep her company. Those of us that drove, she wanted us to visit her on our own. Anyway, one particular afternoon, it was asked of me to visit her, and I didn't. I was a teenager and had other things to do. Anyway, days went by, and no one could find my grandma. She left her things on the dining room table and all of her personal belongings in the house. Then we heard she was found, drowned in the river, and that was the ending to her life. You see, my grandma and grandpa had a beautiful house in the river. Probably a year had passed, and for some reason, my destiny brought me to actually live in their house while I was just getting out of my own, while they were in the process of selling the house. I lived there for the summer of 1985. Many strange phenomena happened that made me a true believer of the afterlife, but one in particular will stay in my mind the most. One day, literally in the middle of the afternoon, I was walking from the kitchen into the living room. I can only recall my last moment of actually being myself, until I had walked through the threshold of the kitchen and the living room. At such time, I only remember walking into a dark cold freezer. That is what it felt like. I stayed in the dark cold place until I began to think for myself again. It was at that point, as I was standing in front of these glass doors that faced the river, that I had mixed emotions of not just my own, but also my grandmother's. As I was beginning to see the world again, it was my grandmother's thoughts. I remember standing there, thinking how the river was my savior, and the answer to all my problems and worries were inside the river. Then I knew what was I had to do, and I was not afraid. The river was going to take me where I wanted to go, to be happy again. Just as I was thinking these thoughts, it scared me, because I knew I was not that kind of person, and whose thoughts was I thinking? It was very quick, and my grandmother left my soul. But from that time on, I really understood what was going through her mind at the time she decided to do what she did. It was almost like she was happy to be telling someone. What she did was not a bad thing. It was what she wanted most in the world. I was happy and scared, all at the same time. She was there, in this house, telling me her life story. Because of this situation, and all the others that she brought to me while I was living there, I believe that a person does not always leave this earth completely, at least until they have been able to explain what they were doing here in the first place, and why they left. This story starts the day we moved to Canberra, Oregon. My father-in-law was gracious enough to let my wife and I stay in the family house until it was sold. The house was occupied by my wife's grandfather until he died, which was about 8 months before we moved in. The family was having trouble selling the house and thought it would be good to have someone to occupy it until it was sold to upkeep the grounds and take care of the property. The house was big to me, coming from an apartment, 2-story and 5 bedrooms, not including the basement. We were both in awe the day we pulled up. The house sits on an acre of land out in the country and was also located directly next to an old pioneer cemetery. It was a little too close for my comfort actually. When you pulled your car up in the driveway, You actually had to get out on someone's grave. My first night there was sleepless, to say the least. This house reminded me of the house on the night of the living dead. Eventually, I got used to the house and all its creaking and groanings, and was ashamed of myself for being scared. My father-in-law will not talk about his dad. There were some strange things that occurred there, and I'm not sure what. In all the closets, we found clocks drawn on the walls in crayon, with the hands of the clocks in different positions. Not just one clock, but many clocks in all of the closets. Trapdoors and drawers in rooms that were set up to only open with a secret spring latch hidden away. I followed a hidden string that led me to it. I've had the feeling, along with my wife, that the children were kept in closets here as punishment. None of the family wants the house. There are 5 brothers and 1 sister, and will not set foot on the property. I had a bad feeling in this house the day we moved in. My wife did too. She just wouldn't admit it. It was free, so we stayed. For the first 6 months, nothing out of the ordinary happened. Then, everything happened at once. I was awake one night when I heard someone coming up from the basement. Not just coming up, but pounding up the stairs. Every step got louder and louder until I thought I would die with fright. I thought someone had broken the basement window and was coming up the stairs. I jumped up and threw on the light, and they stopped. My wife woke up and asked me what the hell that noise was. I grabbed a bat and told her to call the police. Someone is in the basement. I looked, but no one was there. A little while later, my wife's little sister, who was at the time 20, moved into this house with us. She needed somewhere to stay until she could find a place to rent. She wanted to stay upstairs. There was 2 bedrooms up there. That way, she could have the whole entire upper part of the house to herself. We were both relieved to have someone else move in. The next morning, we awoke to find my wife's sister sleeping on her floor in our room. When asked what happened, she sheepishly replied nothing and left for work. She tried staying there another night, but soon moved all her stuff downstairs with us. When asked why she avoided the question, when I had her alone, she finally admitted that she heard noises in the cubby holes up there. She boarded them up with bookshelves she'd bought, but they wouldn't stay closed. Her stuff was thrown out of the way. She left her stereo up there though. This was the only thing she left up there. On more than one occasion, I was woken up by the sounds of that stereo. The first time I was asleep during the day, I was working graveyard then. It was so loud that I got pissed, and figuring her sister was home and turned on the stereo, I ran upstairs to tell her to turn it off. It was not on. She was not there. This happened for 3 days in a row, and I finally checked the damn thing, and it wasn't plugged in. I foolishly told my wife's sister about this. I say foolishly because she left the next day, leaving us alone again. It was quiet for about a week. I was sitting in the living room, eating, when I heard a sound coming out of the kitchen. I was alone, and it was during the day again. I heard the sound of our cookie jar, the Pillsbury Doughboy. This sound is made when you lift the head of the doughboy off. It makes a mechanical laughter noise. I then heard the sound of the head being placed back on. Kind of a porcelain against porcelain sound. Figuring my wife had snuck in and did this. We always thought the noise it made was funny, and pulled the head off once a day or so. I called into the kitchen for my wife. When no response came, I went in to investigate. She was not there. I looked all over the house, figuring she ran to hide or something, but she was not there. When I told my wife about this night, she said it must be that sound, and it went off by itself. I could accept this, except that I heard the sound of the head being lifted off first, then the sound came, then I heard the head being put back down. While I worked graveyard, many was the time when my wife would call me scared to death because of crashing noises she heard in the basement. Things came up missing and reappeared after days in places impossible to miss. We finally moved, soon after buying a house in downtown Portland. My wife waited until we had moved to tell me one last story she had been saving as not to upset me further. On more than one night, she had seen an old man visit the graveyard next door. He wore an old leather hat and had an old clothes similar to those worn in the pioneering days. He carried an old leather pouch and would just stand there in the graveyard staring at our house. When he would leave, he would walk down the middle of the street. My wife got in the car to follow him, but around the corner, he just vanished. He always came, but you never saw him coming. He was just always there. After a while, she stopped looking, afraid of his blank stare. It was like whatever had lived in the house knew we were getting ready to leave. Well, that's it. Hard to believe until something like this happens to yourself. When I was 9, I had my first paranormal experience. After about 3 years of living in a brand new house, and about 6 months after my sisters and I messed around with a Ouija board, I woke up one night at about 2 a.m. and the air totally levitated off my bed. I felt 2 hands grab me, then slam me down on my bed. I really thought nothing of it. I thought it could be a dream, but I did sleep in my parents' room after it happened. After that, I would ask my mom if our house was haunted. She would always say a new house can't be haunted. A few months after that, my second older sister would complain of hearing her name being called. About 4 years later, my parents divorced, and I went to live in an apartment complex with my dad. After about 4 months of living there, I woke up one night, saw my closet door open, and an image of a man walking out. Then the image faded away. I was scared. Then one more came. Voices. I would hear gunshots late at night, but my dad would not hear them at all. 1 year after that, we moved to a 60-year-old cottage house, the house I'm currently living in as I speak. My first experiences were of shadow people going along the walls, and yes, I was very scared. About a couple weeks later, my dad and I were fighting in the family room. Then, the ceiling fan just cut on. At the point of anger I was in, I was not scared. After about 4 months of those experiences, more came. Knocks on the wall, more voices. Around that time I developed an anxiety disorder from all the fear I was going through and went to a Christian counselor. Then, after it got worse, glasses falling on tables, loud noises at night, she came by to command the spirits out of the house. For the next 2 weeks, nothing happened, but now, on this day, March 16th, 2000, we are hearing the noises again at night. Lucky enough for me, I've been taught how to ignore and not to be in fear of those things that are going on. Around the end of April, we'll be moving into a brand new house again. I guess we'll have to see what happens. My husband was sitting at the dining room table one morning about 6 months ago. Now, my husband does not believe at all in the paranormal. He noticed the cat staring up at something at the doorway going down to the basement. He looked down to pick up his coffee cup, looked up, and saw an older woman dressed in old-fashioned clothing standing at the entrance of the stairs. She was motioning with her hand as if indicating him to go downstairs. Needless to say, it scared the life out of him, the non-believer. I got up shortly after this and found him white as a ghost. It's the first time he's ever admitted to seeing a ghost. Our house has many strange happenings. A couple was living in our basement for about 4 months, and every night something strange would occur, from the TV going on by itself to animal growls and sounds of animal claws on the floor. I myself am a converted believer in the paranormal, having witnessed many strange sightings. Would like to share some of the other interested individuals in the near future. Thanks for creating a site for people like me who love ghost stuff. My husband has been cleaning this church for 3 years, and he, as well as the rest of our family, has experienced some very strange things. First, it was just a feeling of a presence that you just couldn't shake, a glimpse of a shadow from the corner of your eye, and the occasional sound that could not be explained. My husband worked his regular job from 4 p.m. to 1:30 a.m. and would go out to the church after leaving his job, and that was when he would experience most of the things. Then, it didn't seem to matter what time of day it was, and it even started happening when the kids would be there helping. Our 2 boys are now 9 and 12, and we never said anything to them for fear of scaring them. There was a time where they were all in an upstairs room, and they were cleaning, and suddenly, the piano started playing one note over and over for a minute or so, and then it stopped. The boys were very frightened, but also very intrigued by the whole thing. I've been a victim of Henry, as we affectionately call him now. I've heard many things, little bumps and unexplainable noises. Our 19-year-old son took over the cleaning job for about 6 months this past summer, and he has also heard many things, like footsteps in front of him, doors on other floors slamming when there is no one else in the church. He also went to clean in the middle of the night, mainly because it is easier to do when no one is there to get in the way. Or so we thought. When my husband took the job back over, it wasn't very long before he would start experiencing Henry again. Oh, did I mention that he would always seem to find dimes lying in the oddest places, sometimes as many as $2 worth in a few hours of cleaning. We never felt like we needed to fear Henry, since his presence never seemed to be a threatening experience, but there was a woman who has been a longtime member of the church, and she was there one day by herself, doing the books, when she had heard moaning to the point of causing her to call the police because she really felt that someone was there. My husband had arrived while the police were in the building. They had asked the woman to wait outside in case they found someone, but needless to say, there was no one to be found. They kind of humored the woman, but my husband told her of his experiences, and she said this wasn't the first time that things have happened to her there either. The most disturbing thing was when he was in the boiler room, cleaning some mops before he left, and me and my 2 sons were outside warming the car, and suddenly he came running to the car with a horrified look on his face and shaking tremendously. I could tell something was terribly wrong, but he didn't want to frighten the boys, so he waited to tell me. After we were able to be alone, he had revealed to me that he actually saw 2 men walking down the stairs in the back of the boiler room, talking to each other as if he wasn't there at all. They were dressed in the style of the 20s and seemed to be almost floating down the steps. There is no way to enter the room from that door, since it is locked very securely. We have had many of the people we have told these things to try to explain them away, but there is no human explanation for these things. There have been times when we have went there and left, only after a few minutes, because there is a sense of something just not being right. I come from a family that my mother and sister have always had experiences similar to this in their lives. I've also had times where I knew the other side is present in my life. My 4-year-old nephew had come with us one day, and the children were all playing with us in the preschool room for about an hour. The next time we took my nephew, which was only the second time he had ever been there with us cleaning, they were in the gym, playing, and he came out in the hall and asked us where the big fellows was at. I was shocked that he would say that, since the only people on both trips he had made with us was us. I didn't want to frighten him, so I just said, "What big fellow would that be?" He responded, "You know, the big fellow that was here the last time we were playing." Well, I felt that this is really all that needs to be said to explain just what or who is in there at this church. A child that doesn't know what we have all experienced can hardly imagine the same thing if it isn't so. Outside of southern Columbus, Ohio, there's a small town called Georgeville, Ohio. We bought a home there that had been remodeled. The original home was added onto, and the original was of a log cabin of Civil War days and owned by a major from Civil War days. Also, from day one that we moved into this house, we started hearing and seeing things. We also had a bad smell that lingered no matter how much we cleaned. In the basement of the new part, we had a pool table at night. You could hear the pool balls being struck and knocked into the pockets of the pool table. We had 3 small children who would not sleep in their rooms, saying their beds rocked and moved, and they were lifted up and turned around by someone they could not see in midair above their beds. We had a big old piano. It would wake you up by playing by itself. Also, around midnight, a couple of times a week, you could be in bed asleep, like in the winter, even with the store windows in and windows closed, and a loud sound of breathing, like a huge animal, would run a long way, would run by these bedroom windows, and it would be so loud. It would sound as if it were in the bedroom with you, exhaling and inhaling, deep and raspy sounds, and a hard, running sound. There was deep snow and drifts piled under the outside windows, but when we went outside to look right after hearing this past our windows, there was nothing there, and no prints of any kind in the snow at all. We sold this house and moved to northern Ohio. To this day, I'm still not sure what I can make of this incident, but I appreciate your reading. I've always believed in the spiritual world, and I've also always feared it. However, the more I fear it, the stronger it draws me to it. I'm also like that with my fear of heights and water. I just like to live dangerously. I'm an experienced Ouija board user now, but when I first started to use it, I didn't know the rules. For example, never use the Ouija board alone. This may lead to possessions such as the famous one in The Exorcist, which is based on a true demon possession. Never give it the power to enter into your world through the Ouija board portal. Alas, I'd broken the second rule and did not realize the consequences. Me and a couple of my friends moved into an apartment together, 3-bedroom. One day, I was telling my friends about the fun Ouija board experiences I had, and they refused to believe me. So the next day, I went out and bought one, and we decided to give it a try that night. I told everyone to meditate and to pray or focus their minds to be clear. I then took turns in pairs, using the Ouija because I knew that spirits sometimes were fickle about who they were communicating with. For example, I seldomly get a response directly on the Ouija board, and it's usually my friends that have to operate the board. However, I'm the one who's usually asking questions to make sure that no one is fooling around on it and making up answers. Anyway, we were asking some questions about lost items and funny stuff, and we were talking to a child ghost age 5 with blonde hair and a red shirt with blue overalls. Eventually, it asked if it could come play with us. I said yes at the time, not knowing I had given it power into the physical world. When we were done, I put it in the closet. My girlfriend was sleeping over one night, and while I was in the shower, she began screaming, so I ran out dripping wet and naked and asked her what was wrong. She was crying and hysterical and telling me that she saw a pair of red eyes staring at her from the closet and a demonic laughing coming from there. When I looked, I didn't see anything, nor did I sense anything except for my adrenaline from hearing her scream. I went to the closet to throw away the Ouija board, knowing that was the same cause of the problem. However, when I went to reach for the board, all of a sudden, I felt my arm dripping into something I can only call a bucket of water floating in midair. Nothing was there physically, mind you. It just felt like I had dipped my hand in a bucket of cold water and my arm was all tingly. I didn't sense any presence besides the physical sensations, so I quickly tore up the board with my hands and began to meditate to build up positive energy in the room. After a while, she calmed down and went to sleep. I was still creeped out, however, so I turned on the TV that's in my room and began to watch. All of a sudden, she sat up and pointed at the closed bedroom door, which was closed, and told the emptiness to go away. Then she put her head down and went right back to sleep. Curious, I woke her and asked her if she remembered her dream. She looked happily at me and mumbled that a little kid had been running in and out of the door saying, "I'm gonna get you," every time he ran in and out. I told her that the bedroom door was closed the whole night. At this point, she seemed confused and said that it was open and that while I was watching TV, a child had kept coming in and out. I asked her to describe the child, thinking maybe it was the same spirit from the board. Keep in mind, She didn't know anything about me having a Ouija board or even using it with my friends. She described to me a little blonde boy in a red shirt and blue overalls. This of course creeped me out even more, and I told her about what happened with the Ouija board. A few months later at a party I was having in my apartment, I told a few of my friends about what happened, and they decided they wanted to try it out. So again, we went to Toys R Us and bought another Parker Ouija board. We played it again, and ended up talking to the same child. This time, I just kinda watched. Some of my friends said that they could feel something sitting in their laps or touching their arms from time to time. The next day my friend called me and said that he had a bad dream and that he woke up with his pillow very bloody from a nosebleed. Needless to say, my friends thought it was perhaps the Ouija board, so we gathered together to ask it what happened. It said that it had done it, and that it would continue to do so with each person for 2 weeks at a time. We freaked out, and I told it if it could stop, and it agreed to stop. The next day, my friend called me again and told me that the same thing happened, so we got together and we burned the Ouija board. After that, nothing else happened, and I never touched another Ouija board again. However, again like I said, I'm into being dangerous, so I'm up for another go if anyone lives near or close around the area and wants to try it together. Now this is going way back, but it is a story I've told my children on many occasions. When I was about 11, 12 years old, a friend of mine and I had set up a Ouija he had gotten for Christmas in his basement when his parents were out and thought we could have a bit of fun with each other. As kids often do, we would ask questions and force the heart around, ask questions, kick the table, and try to freak each other out. How's the best way to put this? A while into it, we heard a rapping sound on his basement window. It hit a couple times, and then, from what he and I remember, 3 more, hard. Scared the crap out of us and we ran upstairs. After we settled down, we started doing what most would do and tried to figure out what happened. The idea we finally came to was that a friend of ours had seen us through the window and thought that he would have a little fun of his own. Now it was our turn to scare him. We went out the front door and snuck around the side of the house. Then, and it still, after all the years, sends chills down my spine. We saw nothing. No one. That in itself scared us more, for it had been snowing and there was no tracks along the side of the house or anywhere around the window the noises came from. It could have not been more than 5 minutes from the time we ran from the basement until we went outside. The snow was fresh. We asked our friend if he had been around the night before without telling him what happened, and he said he had not. Last time my friend, who is now my brother-in-law, and I have messed with a Ouija board. You can call us crazy and paranoid. We don't really care. Hello. I would like to first thank you for giving me the opportunity to have my true story posted. It took place about 10 years ago at my friend's house in Medford, Massachusetts. We both decided at the time to write it out so we don't forget any of it, but I don't think we will ever forget it. Hope you get the same chill I get every time I tell it to someone. On a cold December night, a few days before Christmas, I went to my best friend's house to stay over the night, have a few drinks, and give him his Christmas gift. Paul's wife was away visiting relatives, so he was home with his 6-year-old son Patrick, who was already asleep. Paul lived in a 2-story rental with the landlord living upstairs. When I arrived, he met me at the door with his signature drink in hand. We settled into the living room by the Christmas tree, all covered in blue and white lights. It cast long shadows around the darkened room. By now, we had a few drinks in us as we got caught up in a little music in the background. It was about that time that I reached into a brown shopping bag and pulled out Paul's gift, a long flat box wrapped in green paper. He laughed and said, "I guess it's not a bottle." He quickly unwrapped the gift to find the original Ouija board. He said he always wanted one and opened it. No time like the present. We joked a bit how the Milton Bradley people were the first to come out with the whole chat with the dead home kid. We scanned the directions and began, board on our knees between us, fingertips resting slightly on the pointer. The trick, it seemed, was to put no pressure on the pointer, just barely touching it. We sat for a while, waiting for something to happen, asking dumb questions, all the usual skeptical stuff. But slowly, the pointer began to move. A slow circle in the center of the board. It was so smooth, it was unlikely that Paul could do it unless I was working with him to do it. After about 2 rotations, I pulled my hands away and asked Paul, "How are you doing that?" He stated that he was going to ask the same thing. After a discussion on how hard someone was going to get beaten if they were screwing around with the other, we placed our fingers back in position. Almost immediately, the pointer began to move back in its familiar clockwise circle. Paul began to ask some simple questions. At first, no replies, but then, "Is there someone here with us?" The pointer moved to yes, then spun off, now moving counterclockwise. It seemed to wait for the next question. Paul asked, "Can you hurt us?" "No," it answered. Not much relief in that answer. We were both very spooked badly by this point. I found it odd that after each answer, the pointer would change its direction, and much too smooth and fast for Paul to have any control of it. Next question, "What is your name?" The pointer moved to D, then P. We asked again, but got the same reply. We moved on. Paul, feeling a little more gutsy, I guess asked, "Can you see us?" The answer came yes. "Can we see you?" "No." I then asked why not. The visitor spelled out one letter at a time, D, E, A, D. It was as though neither of us saw that answer coming. It sent a cold chill through us both, and our hands shot away from the board. It took a few minutes of nervous chatter and laughing to get past that one, but somehow we both knew we were just getting started. We moved back to the board and placed our fingertips back. It jumped to life as though it was waiting for us to return. We continued asking away. "Did you live in this house?" "No." "How old were you?" It seemed to struggle with that, so we asked, "Were you young?" It replied yes. "Did you like it here?" Yes was the reply. Spelling seemed difficult, so we thought that whoever it was may have been too young to spell or had not gone to school. We tried to keep yes and no answers, and this seemed to work better. We asked if it was a boy. No. Girl? Yes. Went back to how old. The pointer hung up between 6 and 7. The questions continued, but the answers were few. It was as if DP grew weary of this game. Paul and I put the board away and discussed the information we had to work with. There was a knock at the front door, and our friend Kevin was in the area and stopped in to say hello. While we stood by the door filling him in on what had gone on, we all heard a distinct bell, like an old-fashioned alarm clock, chime just once. It was loud enough to startle us in our already jumpy condition, and Paul quickly said, "What the hell was that?" Kevin said it was an alarm clock. Paul stated that there are none in the house that have a bell. It seemed to come from halfway up the stairs to Patrick's room. Very strange indeed. Kevin headed out, and Paul and I decided it was time to call it a night. After very little sleep the next morning, Patrick came bouncing down the stairs and settled in with the TV. Paul followed him into the room soon after and just gave him a look as if to say, "Did that really happen?" Soon after, Patrick spoke up and said, "I didn't sleep good last night." Paul asked why. "Are you getting a cold?" Pat said no. "There was a girl on the wall in my room. She wanted to come play, but I was scared and I told her I wanted to sleep." A cold shiver ran through us both, and neither of us said a word. No need for Pat to get too far into this one. Later that morning, Paul's landlord was heading out, and Paul met up with him at the front door. He asked if there was ever a young kid that lived in the house that died. Lou answered no, but then stopped and said, "You know, the only kid I knew around here that died lived in the house behind this one. It was a little girl with polio, and she was always sick. He went on to say that she didn't go to school or leave the house much, but when she felt up to it, her mom would go get her and bring her over to play with him and his sisters, so she got to be with other kids. He thought he said she died when she was about 7. Paul and I both had chills by this point, but the question had to be asked, what was her name? He thought for a second and said Dorothy. Dorothy Picante. We knew we had found our visitor from last night. 4 weeks after this night, my phone at home would ring one single chime during the night. I didn't think much of it until one day, while visiting my friend Paul's house again, his phone did the same thing. Ding. He said, it's been doing that since the visit from Dorothy. I told him that the same thing was happening to my phone too. It seems she knows where we both live now. As far-fetched as this story seems, it is the absolute truth. I will never forget the visit as long as I live. I've gone back and forth for a while now, debating on whether I should submit this story. It is absolutely 100% truly something that happened to me. I am skeptical about the events though. While my friend and her mother insist that they had nothing to do with what went on, I am still up in the air about how I feel about the ghosts and spirits and whatnot. Anyway, with that disclaimer, here is my story. This story takes place when I was about 12 years old. I was on vacation with a friend of mine, we'll call her Jackie, her family, and another friend, we'll call her Madison, in Massachusetts. We were staying at Koa campground near Boston, and one night, my friend and her mother, both intensely interested in everything paranormal, suggested that we hold a seance. I'm pretty skeptical in general when it comes to ghosts and whatnot. I'd never had a personal experience with it, didn't really believe that it was possible to speak to the dead, and felt that even if there were possible, it probably wasn't something to be messing with. Anyway, for whatever reason, being bored maybe, I agreed. So did Madison, although reluctantly. We began, lit the candles, sat around the picnic table, held hands, and cleared our minds so that we'd be more open to the spirits. It all seemed pretty hokey to me, straight out of a movie, but I was having a good time. My friend's mother began the seance, but midway through her spiel, Madison decided she had enough and broke the circle. Jackie's mother informed us that we couldn't continue once the circle has been broken because it could lead to all sorts of problems. We were sitting around after that, a little disgruntled since the fun had been ruined. Jackie decided that we should try our luck with the Ouija board instead. This, I was a little more reluctant about. I'd heard all sorts of negative things about messing with those, but being 12, I had no intention of looking scared in front of everyone. We had just teased Madden mercilessly for backing down, so I put on my brave face and agreed. We made a makeshift board out of a strip of brown paper towel, filling the letters in with a marker and using a playing card as a planchette. Starting out, we asked basic questions, trying to connect with anything at all, and not really having much luck. As we got more into things, though, we seemed to connect with a spirit named Keith. He was young, like a young adult, but could not or would not tell us his age. He began to answer only to my questions, calling me May. He would not tell us how he died, or how he knew me, or why he was calling me May. He just spelled out cold a few times. He then spelled out remember red. Things got weird after that. The planchette was all over the board after that, and the answers we started getting were nonsensical. We asked if it was still Keith. The planchette pointed to no, and spelled out bad. The planchette slid quickly across the board and across the picnic table and onto the ground. We picked it up, pointed it to goodbye, and ended the session. Jackie's mother took care of the board, and we went to bed. Now Jackie, Madison, and I were sharing a tent while Jackie's parents were in a cabin next to us. Sometime during the night, I began to feel extremely uneasy. I couldn't fall asleep. I couldn't relax, like I had too much adrenaline. I figured that I had freaked myself out too much and tried to just force myself to sleep by telling myself that I was being ridiculous. But finally, I insisted to Jackie and Madison that I was just too uncomfortable on the ground and that I'd prefer to sleep in the cabin. They agreed, and in we went. The next morning, when we woke up, our tent was flattened and flooded. To this day, I don't know if Jackie and her mom were messing with me or if the tent collapse was just a coincidence, but it definitely scared the hell out of me. I never messed with a Ouija board again, but I must say, these incidents were very convincing. I guess I just have to figure out in my own mind if this is real, or I'll find out in the next life, one way or another. Thank you so much for reading. Yesterday afternoon, Monday, August 26, 2006, I was home alone. My dad was at work sometime with my mom, and my brother was out somewhere. It was just me and my two dogs. It was about 1 p.m., or maybe a little before when this happened. The TV was on, but not loud on, and both families next door were not home or outside. I was just sitting on my couch watching TV when all of a sudden I heard a strange voice of a man say some kind of word. This was very strange because I've never heard such a strange voice before in my house. Maybe this voice was because I was using this Ouija board at the time that I found in my basement. I've heard a little girl's voice and other voices, but never a strange man's voice. The voice was coming from upstairs, so I got off the couch and said, "Is anyone there? Hello? Is anyone there?" Nothing. I heard nothing. So I went back to watching TV. Oh yeah, about a week ago, my brother told me he thinks he keeps seeing some kind of shadowy figure walk by when him and I are watching TV. Kinda creepy. Thanks for reading my short story, and I hope you have a great day. This is true, and it happened to me about 16 years ago. I've rarely spoke of it, and I don't think my wife even knows about it. Well, I grew up in San Diego, California. I lived on a ranch from the time I was 3 until my early 20s. I've seen many things, and I generally don't talk about them because of how strange even I think they are. I've one story that I remember very clearly though. I was in high school, and just so you know, I've never been into drugs, and I didn't drink until after high school. My experience happened while sober. One winter night it was windy and generally cold. San Diego cold was probably in the 50s. I was the only person home. I'd stayed up watching movies. Eventually, I got bored and decided to get ready to go to bed. As I was walking from the bathroom to my room, I noticed all the downstairs lights were on, including the outside lights and the light in the pool. I did think this was odd, but I didn't think twice to go and shut them off. I went downstairs and turned off the house alarm. I had to go outside to shut off the light for the pool and the driveway lights. I re-entered the house, rearmed the system, turned off all the lights again, then I went up the stairs to go to bed. I turned off my light in my room, and as I did, the driveway lights outside turned on. This not being the first weird thing to ever happen to me, I said this is bullshit. I went downstairs in the dark, and as I stepped off the stairs, the kitchen light turned on. I turned off the alarm first and went outside to shut off the driveway lights. As I shut the switch off, I said, "Don't do it again." I went back inside, rearmed the system, and then went to the kitchen where those lights were on. I shut them off and then made sure nobody was home. They weren't, and I went back to my room. Back in my room and the house is in total darkness. I was standing in my doorway making sure the lights were really off. I shut my door and got in bed. As I grabbed the blankets, I noticed the hall light was now on. I could see the lights coming from underneath my door. I didn't think that this was too much of a burden because the switch was just outside my room. I was kneeling on the end of my bed and I opened my door. I leaned around the corner and I flipped the switch off. As I did, there was a light from the top of the stairs. The light was bluish in color and not overwhelmingly bright. Down the hall, maybe 8 to 10 feet from me, was an American Indian standing in full dress, standing very tall and very proud. The bluish light was coming from a weird fog he had around him. His arms were crossed and one fist was clenched and the other had a hatchet. I couldn't see through him. It was like he was really there. I shut my door, waited a few minutes, maybe a lot of minutes. Point is, I went back out there. I rechecked every closet, under every bed, all the bathrooms, and nobody was in this house except me. Like I said, this wasn't the only weird thing that I've seen or experienced. Still, to this day, I can remember the details of the Indian. My name is Don, and I'm writing about experiences that happened over a 26-year period at Maryknoll Avenue, Lindsay, Ontario. It was half of a duplex. I moved into the place with my family in November 1979 and felt that there was something not quite right, but I couldn't put my finger on it, so to speak. Shadows seen from the side of my eyes is all that I seem to see, but some experiences of friends who met each other at my house over the years had seen and convinced me something was going on. It got so that kids to this day on Maryknoll Avenue talked about the haunted house at the bottom of Maryknoll across from the park. To be honest, I don't know if the lady who moved in last year in July of 2004 has experienced anything or not, but I'm guessing she might have. We got settled in, and my friend Sandra came over and stayed overnight, and she told me the next morning she was watching TV, and from the corner of the living room, she saw a wraith who she described as approximately 16 years old and Indian, in a white buckskin outfit, and very pretty. The wraith seemed to communicate with Sandra, but couldn't quite get through, yet Sandra felt she was trying to let her know she meant no harm. Lights would turn themselves on when no one was in the house, and even I was standing or sitting outside having coffee in a nice summer night. Another friend also named Sandra came over with her husband Albert, and they both witnessed my cable box, old kind with wire attached, turn the TV on and the channels change on their own. It had a lever, which you pushed up or down to get the stations. I took it back to the cable company where I had rented it from and told them it kept changing stations on me. You can imagine the reactions when I told them what it was doing. That was in the early 1980s. Albert told me that I was living in what was known as the French Indian Village. He would know about it as he was Indian from Curve Lake and lived in Lindsay for a long time. Albert also felt something was there. He said the Indian village was approximately from Sakaga River to just past the Weldon High School and from King Street to Hillside Drive. In 1981, a girl by the name of Pam babysat for me on Wednesdays when I went to meetings at the church, and one day I came home to a note that said she took the kids to her place to sit as she was scared. I went over and she told me she heard heavy footsteps coming up from my basement stairs, and then the basement door seemed to breathe in and out, and she was petrified with fear of what was happening and got the kids out of the house and took them up to her place. My neighbor Pat told me of feeling someone touching her toes while she was sleeping, and of a dream her sister had of an Indian girl about 16 in a white buckskin dress coming through the wall between my bathroom and the second bedroom upstairs. Her sister knew nothing about what had been going on in my home, yet described the same girl that Sandra did. Margaret and her son Bert and her daughter Ellen was visiting me this one time in spring of 1982 or 3, I think it was, and my little parakeet in his cage on its tripod was with us, and Margaret was enjoying his chirps when the tripod suddenly lifted up in front of us and gently set the cage onto the floor. My white cat Pinky looked through the stairway uprights and meowed. I think she told me see I didn't do it. As for the week before, I had blamed her for the cage being knocked over onto the floor. I guess I was proved wrong. Elle gave Margaret my little parakeet, and she took him home with her across the river. My husband Everett had strange things happen to him while in the basement. Stuff disappearing and being poked in the waist while sitting at his little table in the far corner of the basement, once in a while being pushed on the stairs going up to the second floor. He thought he was just clumsy or something, but Pat's son Keith, who was about 9 or so, had the same experience of being pushed down the stairs, and Margaret was pushed into the hallway wall on the main floor. My husband also seen people come across the lawn or come in before they really did. Once I came in, and he asked me where the heavy lady was, who was walking beside me coming up the driveway, and I didn't know who or what he was talking about. He often saw a shadowy child coming and going up the stairs. About 1992 or 3, my neighbor and a friend moved out, and a lady by the name of Penny moved in, and a few days later she came over and said I may think she was crazy, but she kept seeing Indian ghosts floating around, and some had slit throats. She felt it very weird and didn't think I believed her, but was surprised when I did, as she told me the stuff that other people had over the years. I'd made it a point not to tell anyone new of what I heard unless they asked. Rob and Jen moved in next door to me in 1998, and one day, as Jen and the children were at my place helping me sort out some toys that I was giving away, and Rob came home and went into their place. A few minutes later, he came over and looked in my window, then came in with a very strange look on his face. He said he thought he saw Jen sitting on the sofa when he backed his truck in and went in to see no one was there. The weird thing was, the TV was set to APTN, and a show about Indian life was on. In 1999, he heard drums and smelled smoke, and being curious, looked out his bathroom window and saw a long home in what seemed to be an Indian campsite. His son Chris came up from Osho on March 8, 2001, and had a new digital camera with which he took some pics on the Rainbow Bridge and of his sister in her room. When they were downloaded into the CPU, he was shocked. The one picture had a startling revelation. It was a foggy illusion of a picture of a wolf head in the smoke. My friends new and old have talked over their experiences with each other when they were introduced to each other and found their experiences were somewhat similar. I lived in the housing unit from November 1989 to July of 2004. There are many other tales, but these ones are the one that I remember most. Thanks for reading. I am writing about an incident which occurred during my brief stay in Prescott, Arizona. I was in the community college at the time. One night, my friend and I were walking to the local music store. It was about 9 o'clock. The moon was out, but was not full. There was enough light from the moon to see our way around though. We headed down the hill next to the dormitories, and at the bottom of the hill we saw something, but what? We did not know. As we got closer, we saw a form appear out of nowhere. When we reached the bottom of the hill, the light from the moon showed us a man was standing there, an Indian to be exact. The man was dressed in blue jeans, a light blue shirt, and a blue jean jacket. His head rested crooked on his shoulders as though broken. His leg was bent in as though it was broken as well. The area at the bottom of the hill had at one time been the site of a car accident, where a car was hit by an oncoming train, and both inside were killed. Both people inside were Indians. Anyway, we passed the man, and he spoke one word to us, which was hello. We returned his salutation, as nervous as we are. We heard gravel being walked on behind us. And when I looked back, no one was there. There was nowhere the man could have gone without us seeing him walk away. The time between us seeing him and him disappearing was no more than 10 seconds. The strangest part of the whole incident occurred 1 year later. I was in Belgium visiting my parents. One night, I was driving a friend's daughter home from Girl Scouts when standing on the sidewalk I was passing was the Indian. His head was still crooked and his legs were still bent. It surprised me to see him, and when I looked back, he had once again disappeared. I still have yet to find an answer to these strange incidences. There is the chance that I've seen him again in my new home area, Richmond, Virginia, although I'm not sure. But thanks for reading. I've decided to write about my experiences on this website, as I'm hoping that someone will be able to help. I never truly believed in ghosts until I experienced a ghost encounter for the first time about a year ago. Since then, I've had 2 other very bizarre experiences. I was sleeping in the basement at my boyfriend's place with the 2 dogs at the end of the bed. Everyone was sleeping. It was about 3 to 4 a.m. I just woke up in a jump as if someone just had whispered something in my ear. At the same time, the dogs started barking. I thought I had probably just scared them, but at the same time, I felt a presence. I told myself I was half asleep and was just imagining the entire scenario, so I got off the bed to make my way up the stairs, knowing the dogs would just follow me as they always do, but not this time. As I was making my way up the stairs, the dogs had not stopped barking and had actually started to get aggressive. They were both staring at the wall at the head of the bed, growling and gnashing their teeth in a way I had never seen them do before. It was as if they could sense a presence of harm. I quickly reminded myself that I was probably just still half asleep. So I grabbed one dog under the arm and the other by the collar, and off we went upstairs in another room to sleep. A few months later, again, I was sleeping at my boyfriend's place, but this time alone in his bedroom. I woke up again in a jump and felt something watching me. I glanced in the mirror across the room when I saw an old man looking straight at me. He was dressed in vintage clothes, similar to the leather ceremonial gowns that many Canadian Aboriginal peoples would wear in the past. He had a long braid falling on his right shoulder and blue eyes. At that moment, I just froze and hid under the blankets. I told myself I was probably just half asleep and needed to calm down. I thought to myself, now that you're awake, if you really think this is happening, then check to see if he's still there. So I did, but he was gone. My last bizarre experience confirms the other two. I know I wasn't sleeping or imagining this. Again, I was sleeping alone in my boyfriend's room. It was last winter, and my alarm clock rang at 6:30 a.m. It was still pitch dark outside. As I pressed the snooze button, I heard footsteps coming up. The footsteps sounded like my boyfriend's father's dress shoes. As the steps were getting closer, I heard the dog who was in the other room slightly bark a few times, so I tried to call out to him. As I attempted to do so, my voice was disappearing. I was feeling more and more pressure to my chest and could not call out. Meanwhile, the footsteps are upstairs and heading towards my room. The closer they got, the more pressure was released to my chest. I could barely breathe. I was so afraid. I put my head under the blankets to calm down. I thought to myself, this can't be happening. I must be having a panic attack, which would explain why I'm having trouble breathing. So, in order to calm down, I tried to take deep breaths and focus on getting calm again, until the footsteps stopped at the end of my bed. I figured I just got scared and imagined the whole thing. So I told myself, just like the last time with the old man, if you think there's something there, then why don't you take a look? As I slightly opened my eyes, something was at the end of the bed. I was too scared to open my eyes fully and look at its face. I glanced at the body. It was standing right at the end of the bed. I could feel it looking at me. I tried to call out, but the pressure from my chest was too intense. I was frozen in fear. The only thing I could think to do was to pray and ask my grandfather, who passed away several years ago, to tell this thing I didn't want to talk to him or make any communication with him. After a few seconds of praying, slowly, the pressure from my chest was released. I looked to see if it was still there, but it had gone. That was my last encounter with a ghost. I get the feeling it's trying to communicate something to me, but I'm too scared to confront it. What should I do? Hi, I ran across your website and I wanted to share a ghost story from my local area. Back when I was in high school, my boyfriend and I decided to go driving through the Joshua Tree National Park out here in Joshua Tree, California. It was really late when we were driving up a winding road towards Key View, a popular lookout spot in the park. We drove past what looked like a Native American man walking towards us as we passed. I told Andrew that we should turn around and see if he needed a ride, so we did. When we drove back, we went a good couple of miles and we didn't see him anywhere. We searched the area for a little while with no trace of the gentleman, so we gave up and just went on our way. We drove past what looked like a Native American man walking towards us as we passed. I told Andrew that we should turn around and see if he needed a ride, so we did. When we drove back, we went a good couple of miles and didn't see him anywhere. We searched the area for a little while with no trace of the gentleman, so we gave up and just went our separate ways. The next day, I called the ranger station at the park to report what I had seen and that there was possibly a lost hiker. Unfortunately, a common occurrence here. They told me that several people had reported the same thing within the past 10 years. It seems that the park was previously home to some of the Native American tribes of California until the settlers began showing up in the 1800s. As a side note to this story, about 6 years ago, I was talking with two of my best friends about strange things we see out here, and my roommate Demita mentioned during a camping trip up by Keys Views, she and some other friends had seen the same Indian man I had seen. Valerie, the other friend there, immediately described the man's clothing and his age, saying she had seen him several times since he had lived up at the gate of the park. I hadn't mentioned my sighting at all until they spoke of it. My first story was one my dad told me. It was in Kingston, Massachusetts. My dad and my uncle were sitting in the newly finished basement. They were talking when my uncle stopped and calmly said, "I just saw an Indian woman with a basket of food on her head walk right through here and through the wall." My dad asked, "What?" My uncle repeated again, remaining serious. This gave my dad goosebumps because my uncle's level-headed and doesn't lie about stuff like that. My second story takes place in Buffalo, New York. I was 8 years old and had been living there for 5 years. It was the night before Halloween. My uncle was visiting. My friends were also there as well. My uncle and dad were inside, and me and my friends, let's call them R and W, were outside in my backyard since it was such a warm night. We were playing around when suddenly the fence door, which was locked up tight, flew open. My friends and I ran inside. We went up and played video games. While my friends were playing, I looked out the window to see something that scared the heck out of me. There was a distinct gray figure of a man who was Native American standing in my backyard. Then the figure turned its head in my direction. Then it disappeared. I wish I would like to live without these experiences, and maybe my uncle as well, because I'm sure it petrified him as much as it did me. This story was told to me by a friend who lives in Cuyahoga County, Ohio. It concerns the haunting of a graveyard in a very rural location. I'm originally from a neighboring county, and I lived in Florida for the last 26 years, and met this friend while on vacation at Daytona Beach 6 years ago. And after discovering that we knew a lot of the same people and landmarks, a discussion came up about this graveyard. It is a very old cemetery, with headstones way back to the mid-1800s. I went there with a friend several years back on a trip back to my hometown, and most of the graves are from the Stockholm family from that era in Cuyahoga County. It is located very far from any civilization, in an extremely remote part of the county. It has been used as a party place for darling youths, as the story or legend is widespread among the youth, as well as the oldsters that I talk to. I talk with many people my age, baby boomers, my parents' age, my grandparents' age, present teens, and younger, and got the same general story. It centers around the supposed execution of a woman named Mary Stockholm for practicing witchcraft in the late 1800s in Cuyahoga County. She was supposedly beheaded and buried at the location, with her head and torso in separate graves, and she is seen at the witching hour, looking for her head. This is the main theme of the story, although there is a plethora of individual stories of chilling proportions from my friends' experiences and many other people I talk to. Now, the people I talk to would swear on any polygraph machine that what they told me was true, but the ironic thing is that a similar story from my home county is around about a warlock that was executed around the same period of time and is buried in a remote cemetery in Cuyahoga County that I've also visited. Also decapitated with some burial and looking for his head at midnight. Coincidence or the real deal? I'm not sure. I'm a 43-year-old Caucasian male, married over 12 years, and I have 2 children. I have a college degree, work as a professional, and have no particular religious beliefs. My only experience with ghosts or entities, I don't know what the heck it was, happened to me over a period of about 10 months while living in New Hampshire, about 3 years ago. I'd purchased a large, 2-story, 10-bedroom farmhouse which needed extensive repair. Before we moved in, each night after I got off of work, I would spend several hours painting, wallpapering, and performing the needed repairs. My first experience was this. I was painting in a closet. There was no one else in the building. I was just doing my thing when I heard one distinct bong. It was the exact same sound that an older mantel clock would make. Like most people, I know what it sounds like when I hear song refrains running through my mind, as generated by my mind. I've also experienced a dead ear, where one ear will suddenly go deaf with a loud ringing sound, which fades away after a few minutes. These sounds are eternal, again, generated by my mind, and are familiar to me. This bong was external. It was not generated by my mind. I knew that the house was completely empty of furniture. I'd carted all the rubbish to the dump myself. I continued to paint and soon after ended my night's work at the house. The next evening, I was again painting in a closet when I heard what could be best described as an old-fashioned electric doorbell, the kind with a hammer that quickly strikes at the bell continuously until the button is released. I looked at my watch. It was 1 o'clock again. I put down my brush, stood up, and made a thorough search of the house for the doorbells. I'd never looked for a doorbell until this point. I also searched the basement around the furnace, thinking it might have been an alarm bell or some such. But my search turned up neither bells, wires, or any front or back doorbell buttons on the house. I heard nothing more that evening. About 3 weeks later, I moved my family into the house. About a month after moving in, my son, who was about 3 at the time, told us at breakfast that a woman was in his room the night before. What kind of woman, I asked, and he went on to tell us, with his limited vocabulary, that a woman with white clothes came in and sat on his bed. I asked if she looked like Mommy, and he said no. I asked if she talked to him, and he said no. She just sat there. I asked if she walked in or walked out, but he told us that she just sat on the bed. My wife and I looked back and forth at each other, and then at her son, who continued to eat his breakfast. He wasn't upset or disturbed, and we simply moved on to the business of the day. He never mentioned any other visit again. Today, at 6 years old, he says he does remember the woman, but can offer very little about her. About a week after this, my wife confronted me when I came home from work and told me that all afternoon, she heard the continuous rattle of dishes being moved about in the kitchen while she was either upstairs or at the other side of the house. She also heard the cupboard's door slamming shut, hard. She told me that she would go to the kitchen to see what was going on, but would find nothing out of the ordinary. In all the time we lived in the house, I never heard the dishes or cupboard doors. Over the next month or so, my wife told me that she would also hear various doors in the house slamming, but again, when she went to see or walk through the house, the doors were as they had been. I had taken pains to insulate against the New Hampshire winter cold and wind. This house was not drafty. We had candles lit on many winter nights, and never saw them so much as flicker. My last personal experience in the house was the most dramatic. My wife had taken the children shopping and had been gone for about an hour or two. It was a Saturday afternoon. I grabbed a book next and laid down on top of my bed to read a few chapters. After a bit of time, I heard the door at the bottom of the stairs open, doorknob rattle, a bit of hinge work, and heavy footsteps coming up the stairs. Our bedroom was at the top of the stairs, and I could see the landing from my bed. As I heard the first few steps, I thought to myself that my wife must have been home, but I knew that I hadn't heard the car entering the yard, car door slamming, kids talking, etc. All the normal sounds of my family's arrival from a shopping trip. I dropped the book flat onto my chest and looked over my feet towards the bedroom door and stared at the top landing space, all the while footsteps continued to climb the stairs. Clump, 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 to all have been the top, but nothing. I got up and went to the landing. Nothing. I went straight down and through the house, to the kitchen. I looked out to our driveway. Just my car sat there. I made some coffee, went back to my room, and about an hour later, my wife and kids returned home. I told her my story, as I've just told you. I had no personal experiences with this sort of thing in this house, nor at any time before or since. We moved away about a year later to Florida. We moved for the weather, the financial opportunities, to be closer to other family members, but not because of any hauntings or the bizarre. The farmhouse we lived in still stands and is well known in the town we lived in, and it continues to be known locally as the Sheaver Farm, and is located on the Sheaver Road in Dorchester, New Hampshire, about 20 minutes west of Plymouth, New Hampshire. I've lived in my house since I was born, 34 years ago. When I was about 5 years old, I was sleeping in my grandmother's couch upstairs when I kept being awakened by the sound of heavy footsteps going up and down the stairs loudly. I was really scared, but when I reached for the door handle to have a look, the sound stopped, and afterwards, I was too scared to try having another look, so I just listened until falling asleep. When I was 8, my mother and older foster sister were returning home one night from seeing the Exorcist movie at the movie theater when things got really out of hand. My younger sister and I shared a bedroom, and her brother had the room to the other side of the wall, at our heads. We frequently played games of knocking and code, and this night, we didn't want to play, so we didn't knock back. Sometime after the knocking began, we heard my brother call to my foster sister and tell her to have us stop knocking. He was tired and wanted to go to sleep. My sister and I said, "What?" When she came in to tell us to stop, we told her that we were not knocking and that we thought it was him, and we were tired and wanted to go to sleep. She almost believed us and went back to the kitchen with my mom. The knocking continued, and my sister and I called up to my foster sister to have my brother stop knocking. When she went to tell him, he was sound asleep. We told her that he wasn't sleeping, that he was knocking, and she insisted he was really asleep. The knocking occurred in rhythms, as if it was some kind of Indian drum kind of tapping. It even got louder and faster and moved to different walls in the room and to the ceiling. My older foster sister and my aunt each slept in me and my sister's beds until we fell asleep. We were so scared listening to the Indian drums, we wanted to run out of the room, but they made us stay there and lay in the bed and listen to it until we fell asleep. After we fell asleep, they got up and went back to the kitchen, probably to discuss the events. When we woke back up to the same noises, finally, they put a mattress in the middle of the floor in the living room, and we all slept there together for the entire night. If you know when The Exorcist was in the movie theater, you know that was a really long time ago, and we haven't had any Indian drums since then, but I've heard of 2 other houses on my street who had the same noises in them. Me and a lot of my friends have a lot of different kinds of encounters with ghosts in my house over the years. This story is true, and this house really is haunted. Let me start off by saying, I never met my real father. He died when I was a baby. Anyhow, I've always known about my deceased father. His name was Jerry. Now, no one in my family talks about my deceased dad, and we don't know anyone by the name of Jerry. One day, when I was between the ages of 8 and 9, my cousin, my mother, and myself were down the stairs in the basement singing. The phone began to ring, and even though we had a phone in the basement, I went upstairs one flight to our library to answer the phone so as to not disturb my mother's song. When I answered the phone, I noticed immediately the static on the line, and I knew it wasn't our phone, so I asked the caller to speak louder. Now, from here on out, it gets weird. The caller asked to speak to RE7, my mom's nickname. I then asked who was calling, and the caller replied Jerry. I immediately knew my mother knew of no other Jerry, so I repeated the name, and the caller acknowledged that that was his name. I tell him to hold on. I run down the stairs to where my mother and cousin were and tell my mother to pick up the phone, that she had a phone call and that the caller's name was Jerry. My cousin looked up shocked, as did my mother, and simultaneously said Jerry. This all happening within a minute or so. So, my mother picks up the phone and answers the call, only there is no one on the line now. I run back upstairs to the library to hang up the phone, and I go back to the basement, and both my mother and my cousin are trying to figure out if I got the name right. I assure them I did, and tell them about the connection and the static. We all just kind of dismissed the call. Only later, when I started thinking about it, did I realize that my father never knew me and died very tragically when he was struck by a car. I think he wanted to hear my voice and hear my mother's voice. What I didn't tell my mother or my cousin is that the caller addressed me by my name. I never told the caller my name, but he knew my name. to Maya. Hi, I've sent info before, but I'm using a friend's computer today since the battery in my car is dead. Nothing to do with ghosts, I don't think. Anyway, having read about people seeing black figures, I thought I would add my 2 cents. The first time, I was 16, living in LA with my grandparents, who were out of town at the time. I wasn't drinking, just alone. When I left my bedroom, crossed the hall into the kitchen, when a figure stepped out in front of me. I saw the legs and arms, kind of like that famous Bigfoot photo. It was creepy. I got a baseball bat and turned on all the lights in the house and called a friend. Nothing else. Then, just less than 2 years ago, I had since moved to Quarles, New Hampshire. I was living with another woman. I got up in the middle of the night to use the restroom. As I came out, through the door, there was another shadow being right in front of me. I saw its head and shoulders, taller than me. I put my hands up, as if to gesture excuse me, or not to run it over. Since then, here in Quarles, I felt things in the corners, rushing around the room and such. I bought my own house in July 1999, and my dog barked incredibly at one particular corner. My roommate at the time immediately burned sage, and he stopped. What are these things? I've not seen anything in my place, and the dogs haven't acted weird since. Someone did say that I've been dimension jumping. Have you heard of this? At one time, I never believed in ghosts or spirits or anything that is supernatural. That is until I went over to my friend Sarah's house. It all started back in '96. I'd been real friends with Sarah all my life, which would have been 15 years then, and she had told me about her house. Being the skeptic that I was, I would laugh at her and call her crazy. I never went over to her house much, and when I did, it was only for a short amount of time. Well, during the summer of '96, I started staying the night with her about every weekend. I noticed when I first went into her living room, it was very cold in one particular spot, right in front of the stairway. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and my arm and leg on the right side got goosebumps on them. My friend Sarah and her fiance saw them too. My second experience was about a week later. Me and Sarah decided to call it a night. She slept on the couch at that time because her waterbed mattress had a hole in it. So, she pulled out a twin-size mattress for me to sleep on. Well, the mattress was facing the stairway, which had a sheet over it, because Sarah said it felt like someone was staring at her from the top step when she would try and sleep. Anyways, as I laid there, I looked over at the sheet, and all of a sudden, it pushed out in the middle. Well, at first I thought it was just a draft or something, so I sat there and watched it, and it did it again, but this time, it shot out even further in the middle. I sat there and waited to see if it would do it again, but it didn't. My second experience happened 2 weekends later. Me, Sarah, and her fiance at the time were the only ones home. Sarah and her fiance decided to take a shower, and I was still tired from staying up late the night before that I decided to take a nap while they were showering. I was almost asleep when I heard the squeak and then a bang of, well, like a cabinet door. Thinking it was Sarah and Jake, I sat up and walked into the kitchen, and I heard it again. So, I walked back to the bathroom and asked if either of them were out of the shower. They said no, that neither of them had gotten out at all. When I got back to the living room, I heard it again, and I knew where it was coming from then. Upstairs, in the attic part of the house. You see, the upstairs of this house is made weird. The attic and the room upstairs are one big room, with a wall cutting it in two. Well, the door in the attic is a very small square door that they always keep locked because a bat or two has been known to get into the house. Anyways, when I got upstairs, I saw the door closing with my own eyes. Needless to say, I did freak a little. Well, Jake and Sarah got out of the shower, come into the living room, and see that I am white as a sheet. I tell them, and my friend goes and checks it out and says, "You won't believe this when I tell you." I said, "What?" And she said, "The door is locked. The door has a bolt lock on it that slides side to side." My third experience turned me into a believer. Me and Sarah were the only two there, besides a dog, who was asleep at Sarah's feet. We were talking, and all of a sudden, we heard a pop can getting knocked around under the couch. We got a little nervous, and then, to our relief, a mouse darted out from underneath the couch. We started laughing, and I made a comment about a big old mouse must be what causes the noises we hear, etc. Next thing we know, we hear these footsteps, loud footsteps, going from my friend's parents' bedroom to her brother's bedroom, at the back of the cabin. It sounded like someone had work boots on, and was just stomping on purpose. Well, my friend looks at me and says, "Now that is one big frickin' rat." I said, "Let's go outside." Thank you for letting me share this few experiences that I have encountered. What I told you is just the beginning. If you'd like to hear more, just let me know. When I was 12, my family moved to a newer house about 10 minutes away from where I grew up. The house was 7 years old and no one had ever died there. From the start, I would hear footsteps in the carpeting and I always felt that I was being watched, especially when I played our piano. That was the extent of my experiences until I was in my early 20s. One evening, my sister and I were sitting in the den talking. It was spring and the temperature was perfect, so all the windows were closed and the air was off. Suddenly, in the back of the room, there were a lot of plants sitting together. One plant in the middle started shaking furiously. My sister and I looked at each other and went into the other room. A few weeks later, my mother and I were sitting alone in the house when it sounded like someone very roughly racked fingernails down a couch in the back of the room, which was in sight, and again, a plant that was sitting at the end of the couch started shaking furiously. My mother just would not admit that we were being visited, even though she'd witnessed it firsthand. The last thing anything paranormal happened was on a Friday afternoon. I was in my mother's room, talking to her, when I noticed the atmosphere had seemed to have grown heavy, and I got chills. As the afternoon wore on, the feeling increased until I couldn't stand to go into the room any longer. That evening, my sister and I were alone and watching TV. I'd gone to the fridge for a snack and felt the heaviness with the goosebumps on the left side of it. I told my sister that the ghost was in the kitchen. I could feel it. A few minutes later, a picture that was hanging in the kitchen fell off of the wall. When we got the nerve up, my sister and I went around to another door in the kitchen on the opposite side of the room. We walked in and stood there, seeing and feeling nothing. Suddenly, the hair on our arms literally stood up, and we had to run out. Immediately afterwards, it left, and hasn't been back. I don't even feel like I'm being watched while playing the piano. I guess whatever it was only wanted to communicate, but I was too frightened. I felt the heaviness with chills in other places, but until the last few years, I hadn't seen any entities. I've moved twice, and really don't believe the houses were haunted, but intermittently, and for short periods of time, I believe there were entities present. I've seen a man with long salt and pepper hair, with a dark cloak, looking at me with bright, colorless eyes. It looked like a negative of a photo. Also, I've seen a bright, elongated white shape out of the corner of my eye, around my bed several times. The most profound experience I've ever had was when I was visited by a spirit of a friend who had died a week before his 16th birthday. Almost 10 years later, I started having dreams with him there, and I would wake up with the most wonderful feeling of being loved. During one of those dreams, I was at home alone during the day, and I had to sleep because I was working nights. It was a little warm, but not enough for the air. I had 2 blankets on my bed and threw one in the floor, and the other one was a mess because I had been tossing and turning. I finally made it back to sleep and dreamed of my friend. I got too hot, and woke up to find the blanket I tossed on the floor laid over me very neatly. I've had too many experiences to discount anything to just chance, and my mother is finally admitting that she has experienced the paranormal. I live in Tucson, Arizona. Shortly north of the city lies Mount Lemmon. This peak is a great pine-forested, 7,000-foot getaway from the desert city. I had my brother and two friends over at my place at about 1 a.m. a few months ago, and after a few hours of boredom, we decided to go up to Mount Lemmon and enjoy some nice cool night air. I would often take the 45-minute trip to wind down and watch the stars, so this is a very familiar place. The trip started off very normal. Our first stop was without occurrences. The next stop, I became mildly aware of a presence. This is nothing new to me, however, so I ignored it. By the third stop, we got out again. My brother and our friend Steve stayed in the car, and my friend Thea and I went for a walk. After a short discussion about friend trouble, she interrupted and said she kept seeing a shadowed figure from the top of a nearby peak. I told her that something was watching us, but not to worry, because I didn't sense hostility. We started to walk back and kept hearing the sound of scattering gravel and an extra set of footsteps on the other side of me. This was at first amusing because we knew at this time we had gained a friend that was not from around here. By the time we got to the car, Thea panicked, and when we got in, my brother Steve spoke of shadow figures they saw. We smiled, started the car, and drove down the mountain. As we spoke about what we saw and felt and heard, it was decided we would stop again. We pulled off at a scenic view of a canyon area, where we found a newer model Ford Bronco with the engine idling, the dome light on, and no one in or around the vehicle. This was unsettling, but could surely be explained, no matter how far-fetched the explanation. We stayed here for about 10 minutes. After the first couple of minutes, my brother and I simultaneously noticed a large dark mass above the peak we were being watched earlier from. Thea saw shadow figures on the top of the peak. I could see the mass disappear, as if moving down the mountain towards us. Thea said the figures were walking down the mountainside. No one was scared at this point. We were all very amused. When I could no longer see the mass, I was only able to see above the mountain because the sky posed as a backdrop. We all got a wave of panic. Gravel started swirling around everywhere, and Thea and Jason ran for the car. I was stunned, so I was the last to get there. Jason entered the car from the other side, but this heavy trench coat was flipped over his head as he opened the door. We started the car and sped down the mountain. We spoke with Steve about what we saw. He saw the same shadow figures Thea had seen. We pulled over one last time without getting out of the car to show Steve the big black mass that was causing all the commotion. We then kept driving until we reached the city again. The whole way down, seeing cars pulled off to the side, some with dome lights on, never with anyone in or around them. This is very odd for 3 a.m. on a Thursday morning. Furthermore, vehicles are not allowed to park on the road after 10 p.m. The next night, Thea and I returned. We never got out of the car this time. However, every time we cut the engine and all the power, we hear scratching underneath the car, and eventually, it would start to rock. We pulled over 4 times. This happened every time. Finally, the 5th time, we decided to get out of the car before that happened, so we would have enough guts to see what else would happen. Once again, we didn't make it. We opened the doors and pointed our flashlights outside, and as soon as we did, gravel started swirling around, louder than before. There was no wind, and we watched it jump around as if someone was kicking it right in front of us. After this trip, it turned out that the brakes in front of the left of the car, where we heard the scratching from when the car was off, were worn down badly. However, the rest of the brakes were fine. We stumped the mechanic, but once again, this is something that may be explained. I just don't know how. I'm planning a return trip, well equipped now. I will bring a camera, several flashlights, and a video recorder. Depending on the outcome of this trip, I will forward any eventful images to your site. I am stuck wondering two things now. First off, what is this entity? There are no local legends that I have found yet about Mount Lemmon. Second off, will there be again, when I visit next week, something? I certainly hope so. There is much more I would like to learn before it becomes just a memory. If anyone has any suggestions about this incident or what it could be, please email me. I'd love to know. I'm just going to tell you two stories that happened to me. That scares me a lot. Just about 2 years ago, I moved to a new city and moved into a new neighborhood, school and everything. Moving into a new house was awesome, and it was a gorgeous house. The first day of school, people found out that I lived in the house I'm currently no longer living in, and told me it was haunted, and no one ever felt like coming over. I was thinking, right, but that's when things actually got creepy. In through our garage was wooden stairs leading to the basement. Well, every time I'd come home for lunch, and even when I'd be home there all by myself, something clicky would be heard, and I would just freak, until one day, I knew it was coming from the wooden stairs. I stood by the stairs, and all I'd hear was a click, and nothing would be there. One day I got fed up at lunchtime, and I told my mother what I'd been hearing at home and school, and we were right beside the stairs. As I'm telling her, she tells me young brains have lots of things just to fill in their mind. I'm thinking, Mom, very funny. My mom opens the garage door, and there it happens again. The clicking sound once again. My mom freaked and grabbed me and rushed us into the garage. She told us to stay there, and she took a bat and went inside. I was worried. She had just left me there all by myself. A couple of minutes later, I walked inside scared out of my mind, and I headed down the stairs and went down them, and there my mom was, worried. She said she saw nothing. A few days later, my mom talked to the owner. She knew him, and he says, weird. My mother died on her birthday on these stairs. She got a brand new pair of clicking shoes. After that day, we never heard it again. Another story happened with me and my brother. Well, I was young and was a big chicken, so I stood by my brother while my mother left for groceries. Let me start off this way. My brother would have this small play toy gun, and it was his favorite gun, and he'd have it all the time, and kept it in his drawer when it wasn't in use. Now back to when my brother and I were sitting at the computer. He's 2 years older than me. My mom had been gone for a while. We stood there, and I was pale and just staring. All of a sudden, something started laughing, like a clown, and it sounded as if two clingy things had been clanging together. And then I realized it was the sound my brother's gun made, and I was thinking, oh my lord. My brother and I started freaking, and we ran to the stairs, and it got so loud. And then the door handle started moving, and it was banging, and I ran and opened it, and it was my mom. She asked us why we were so pale. When we told her, it wasn't something she seemed much to care about. Like we were just children telling our tales. My brother that night went to go play his toy gun. It was gone, and was never to be found again. A lot more of these things have happened, and if you're interested in some more, I can write them up and email you. We moved out of the house just down the street, and nothing's happened to us like that again. Hope you enjoyed my stories. Myself and other employees, including management, have been upstairs in what was supposed to be the original owner's apartment. When you are up there, someone will either tap you on the shoulder or grab your shoulder, and when you turn around, there is nobody there. You will also hear things moving around while using the bathroom, and when you open the door, nobody is up there but you. The given story is that it is the ghost of our owner's father. His father's dream was to open up this brewery with his children, Joe Jr. and Michelle, but he died shortly after it had opened. The oddest thing of all of that is that I was walking some customers out to their vehicles when one of them told me she felt 3 spirits inside. I had not mentioned anything of the hauntings. She said one was an older gentleman, but the other 2 are children. I know absolutely nothing of the children in this area. A quick little story about Utica, California that I think you might find interesting. My older son John, 26, and his girlfriend Jana, 23, plus William, 64, also the same ghost in Utica. He was a thin man that seemed to float. They followed him from one room to the other, and he vanished. We also have a candle on top of the family room TV that gets knocked onto the floor every few days for no apparent reason. We have been watching the candle get knocked off as if someone were pushing it on the floor. It just gets swiped off the TV. Sometimes the TV is on, sometimes not. My house definitely has a ghost, but I don't know who this tall, thin man was. I kind of like it that he's here. It's like having another pet. Just thought you'd want to know about this story. I find it fascinating. Me and my friends Mike and Maria used your site for a reference on where to go, and we've gone to 2 places so far, and I'd like to share my experiences with you. The Sleepy Hollow Sparta Cemetery. We've been there twice. The second one being about an hour ago. The first time we went was about 2 weeks ago, and there is an open gate to get in. We made a discovery about something I will tell you in a little bit. The first time we went there, we got in okay, and we only visited about, the first half of the cemetery. We continued to hear rustling, but tried our best to remain calm. We then came across 2 mausoleums. My friend Mike decided to go see if they were open, but he became too creeped out and came back towards me and Maria. While standing outside of them, we noticed a light from the street shining through the trees, making an angel-like silhouette on the building. We all stared at it for a bit, and Mike mentioned that it looked like an angel. Suddenly the light turned off. Kinda creepy. After that we left. The second time was tonight. There were the 4 of us. Me, Mike, our friend Rob, and his girlfriend Steph. We got into the same gate once again, and we proceeded to explore the same area as we did last time. This is where we made our discovery, and maybe you can post a warning next to this place for people on the listing. The light we saw last time that came from the street, making the angel-type figure, maybe a motion detector, because it shines right into the cemetery, even though it's far in the street. When we walked, the light turned on. This is when we started to be concerned, and we also heard sirens, but they were ambulances. Then, this is where it gets spooky. As we were walking the road back to the 2 mausoleums, I happened to glance to the trees, and what appeared to be standing there was a silhouette of a person. Then I noticed a hat, shaped like a police officer's. Then I tried to show Mike, and he saw it too. But then I noticed it wasn't moving. When we were leaving, it was a statue on top of a tombstone. However, when we left, Mike explained to me that what he was looking at wasn't the statue, it was the shadow, he says, and his description of the shadow was the same police-type figure. We were both looking at two different things, but had the same description. I think something there didn't like us, and was trying to give us an illusion to get out. The other two that were with us didn't see anything. The only conclusion that we could come up with was that something there remembers us from our last visit, and most likely didn't want us there. Our other adventure in Brewster, we drove up there. There was like 6 of us. We drove past a pond, and I saw something across the pond that looked like a flashlight being waved. I don't know what it was, but when we stopped at the gas station before we headed over to the pond, someone said party at the lake tonight while purchasing alcohol. We parked up on a street about a mile or 2 away from the pond, and we all walked down to the road to it. We also had a recorder with us the entire time to see if we picked up anything we didn't hear. We found a dead animal on the side of the road, as well as many beer cans. We also kept hearing rustling in the woods as we came to the pond. When we came to the pond, we saw nothing for about 10 minutes, so we walked back to the cars. We began walking faster when we heard a crash in the woods, and then we got back to the cars and stopped in front of the golf course, where I took a picture of the sign. Me and Mike were taking pictures the same time, and I noticed there was a red orb-like structure on the side of the sign. It's not present in Mike's pictures though. Then afterwards we found a cemetery nearby, but nothing creepy happened. When we came back home, we listened to the recordings. We picked up a loud crash and 2 moaning, whispered sounds. One being directly said after Mike said, "That was definitely a noise." So there is the report of our 3 places that we visited. Thanks to your site, we're addicted. Please write back if you have anything to say. While my own experience is not really that of a ghost encounter, I still believe that it may relate to some of the stories. Mine is a premonition. Growing up in Florida, I would visit my step-great-grandfather. Even though he wasn't truly related to me, he was far closer to me than any of my blood relatives. I remember always seeing him sitting in his recliner and chewing his tobacco. When I was about 10, I began having these strange dreams. In the dream, I was walking through a house that was on fire. I was in a long hallway, and the flames were on my right side. I was not scared in the dream, more curious than anything else. Every few meters, a round gray shape would rise out of the flames and go over my head. I tried, but could not see what was on the left. It was as though my head wouldn't turn far enough. I had this dream on and off for about 2 years, before it finally stopped. I didn't have the dream again until I was 14. However, this time, the dream was different. I began having it every night for 2 or 3 months straight, and every time I saw the shape, it was a little bit clearer. One night I realized it was someone's face though, and I couldn't make out whose. The dream stopped for 2 weeks. Then I had the dream 2 more times. The last time, I realized it was the face of my step-great-grandfather. The next morning, my mom told me that he had died in his sleep. I thought perhaps it was just my subconscious mind telling me that he was old and that he would die soon. But when I was 17, I got a book from a friend, and in the book, it had a section on dream interpretation. I read that if you dream of a house on fire, then there will be a death in your family. At that point, I remembered all of the dreams I ever had. I realized that it was more than just my mind warning me. I have on occasion felt as if someone was with me whenever I most needed someone to care. I believe that it is him. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to read through my story. I am sure that others feel as I do, and I thank you for having your website to help the rest of us better understand these strange occurrences. When I was a freshman in high school, my mom and stepdad and I moved into an older home, built sometime in the late 1920s or early 1930s. I assume this from the newspaper I had found, dated 1936. When we first moved in, there wasn't any odd things happening, not until my stepdad and my uncle started putting in rooms upstairs in the loft. One night after a long day of swimming with friends, I decided to go home to take a nap and meet back up with my buddies later that night. Well, that didn't happen. I awoke too, or whom I thought was my nephew Sam, tapping me on the foot. The room was very dark, just a small bit of light through the curtains. I looked over at the clock. It was late, around 11 p.m. So I said to whom I thought was my nephew, "What are you doing in here? And where's your mom?" You see, they lived next door to us. And I asked again. With no answer, I got up and turned on the light. No one was there. Okay, I said to myself. That was odd, and very reluctantly went to sleep. That wasn't the end of it. One night I woke up with all the covers off my bed. Maybe I kicked them off. Who knows? I know because the second time it happened, I was not asleep when I felt the covers slowly pull off of me and off the end of the bed. Can we say what the heck? And that's when I slept downstairs on the couch for a few minutes, telling my mom it was too hot upstairs to sleep. A few months had gone by without anything happening until they put another room upstairs in, and I moved into that one. I started hearing sounds on the roof, like if someone was throwing a ball into the roof, and it was bouncing down. Went on for at least a good month. Well, the ice finally broke when my grandfather, who had been living with us, asked my mom one morning who was standing in her doorway last night. My mom said no one, and my grandma replied that it was a child and a woman. And that's when I told them what was happening upstairs. Strange. I am 13 years old, and I live in Florida. I took a trip to St. Augustine for vacation 2 years ago. My family and I stayed in the St. Francis Inn, which is a bed and breakfast. We stayed in the Sanford suite for like one night, and the lady at the front desk said that her daughter had to babysit there, and the kids were playing with those Hot Wheel toys. Well, she said that her daughter called her up and said that the toys were moving on their own. I was so afraid to sleep in that room. Well, the next 2 nights, we stayed in the cottage. It was very homey-like, and I had no problem with it. I went upstairs to the room I would stay in, and I didn't feel comfortable at all. I felt like something or someone was watching my sister and I. So that night, I slept in the pull-out couch. That night, my mom said that late at night, she heard footsteps coming up the stairs and into the room that my sis and I were supposed to stay in. Everyone was sleeping, so there was no logical explanation. Creepy. And the next morning, my mom went to have breakfast, and she was talking to these really nice people that stayed in the supposedly haunted room. Lily's room. There is a whole long story to the room, and I don't really know the details. The couple staying in that room said that they took some pictures, and in one, there was an armchair from like a long time ago against one wall, but it wasn't actually there. So they started walking out to the courtyard next to the cottage and said, "Oh, It's just Lily messing around with stuff. As soon as they said Lily, the light above the cottage door went out. My dad went to check it out, but there was nothing wrong with the light bulb. I was freaked out. We were gonna leave that very day. My mom couldn't find her car keys or the cottage room key. She was looking, and she found the car keys on top of the counter, and the cottage keys inside the door, and the door we never came in through. This story is all true, from what my mother told me. This will be the second story that I've sent you. My mom told me this story, and said that she was about 10 or 11 during the time of this experience. She said she was sleeping in her bed one night, and she woke up at about 1 in the morning. She looked up and saw a white shadow floating next to her bed that had big eyes. She said its head looked a little swollen, and it looked like it was trying to say something. Got really scared and tried to scream to wake her mom. She was so scared that she couldn't even make a noise. She never told her mom about it because she was so afraid that her brothers would tease her. But a week later, she said she heard her brother, my Uncle Kevin, say that he saw a white figure with a swollen head. Well, to start it off, I can see and talk to dead people. It sounds crazy, I know, but it is the truth. I'm not one of those people that you see on TV, but it's pretty much the same thing. I started seeing ghosts when I was 6, while I was asleep in my bed. I was awakened by what I thought was my brother walking around, but it turned out to be somebody I didn't even know. I wanted to scream, but I was so terrified. At first, he didn't even notice me. Then he saw me, looked surprised, and then disappeared. I saw footprints just appear on the floor, heading inside my closet. I've been scared of my closet ever since. I couldn't see who it was because it was so dark, but the next day I found out that it was a kid. While walking upstairs to eat breakfast, I saw him sitting on the steps and frowning at me. I noticed him, stopped, and I really wanted to scream. I was just about to let one out when he put his fingers to his lips, signaling me to be quiet. I didn't want to scare him away, so I didn't yell. I smiled. He smiled back. I then blinked, and he vanished. At this point, I thought I was going crazy. I went upstairs, ate my cereal with my family, all the while he watched. I tried to shrug it off when a vase he was sitting next to fell off and broke. Then I was staring wild-eyed at him. He frowned and disappeared again. I later was walking down my basement when I heard some crying. I thought it could be my brother because he was frustrated that he couldn't beat a video game. He always cried when he couldn't win. But when I got down there, the TV and the lights were off. I was again terrified, but I peeked around the corner, and nothing was there. All I heard was crying, but it was getting louder. I was turning around to run when I saw him right there in front of me. I fell on the ground and screamed. He cried even more at this. I could hear my parents asking if everything was all right while they were making their way downstairs. I looked at him, and he vanished once again. The crying stopped as my parents came in a little crawl space that was called the toy room. They looked at me stunned, still staring at where the little ghost used to be. They asked if I hurt myself or something, and I just said no, I just tripped. They then inspected my body, really see if I was just toughing out some scrape. My mom looked at my dad, and then shrugged. My dad's next reply scared me so bad, to the point I peed my pants. Well, then why were you crying then? Well, after a few more meetings, I found out that he was a ghost. Yes, I didn't know before. After a while, We became friends, but he never spoke, just helped us out and played with our toys. Like once, before we even went to our grandparents' house, we had to clean the basement. It took hours, but we finally did it. Then we went to my grandma's. When we came home, my brother and I went to the basement and we played video games. It was a mess. We groaned, and I screamed, "Sam!" We named him Little Black Sambo because of his color. Not to be racist, for those of you who are easily offended. While my brother went to the bathroom, he appeared, at first smiling, but then frowned. Seeing how distressed I was, I looked him straight in the eye and said, "Help us clean, or clean it yourself." I stormed upstairs to get my mom so she could help us. We were just heading downstairs when I heard my brother scream. I ran out to figure out what Sam had done. When I got in there, I saw my brother shaking, his eyes fully open, looking to and fro. I looked into the room and gasped myself. It was perfectly clean. My mom got down there and said, "What mess." It was 6 years that I had known him. He was mine and the family's best friend. It was almost as if he was a part of the family. My life was going good. I was starting 7th grade. I had lots of friends. What more could I ask for? I've decided that we were moving. I'll never forget that day. The day my mom decided to move. She had wanted to move before, but never actually did. We've even had a for sale sign in our front yard before, but it was taken down only a few days after, because my mom didn't want to leave the home she raised her children in. Now she was serious. The sign went up almost immediately, and she started looking at houses. At first I thought it was cool. I mean, the house we were in was good, but we didn't live in the best neighborhood in the world, which was exactly why my mom wanted to move. It was a long time before someone decided to buy our house for $200,000 in cash. We moved out in a week. My father took his offer, and we started packing immediately. I was so sad to leave this home. I had so many memories there, but I had to move on. While I was packing my things, Sam appeared beside my bed, but he wasn't smiling this time. He was frowning. Then he vanished. I was more sad that week than I ever was, or will be. I had known Sam for 6 years. 6 years. It was like leaving a little brother to me. That entire week, I begged him to go with us. Obviously, he didn't go. The day we left was the worst day ever. It's ironic, because it was the day after Easter. As I was heading out of what was now our empty house, my brother and I ran to the toy room where Sam was. It was like he wasn't even there in the first place. Sam was completely gone. Vanished out of thin air. It was the most bizarre thing ever. When we moved into our new house, the house that I'm in now, there was only one ghost. A mischievous poltergeist that is so annoying. He once turned on our TV and cranked the volume up to the max while we were all asleep. It scared the crap out of my mom, but he thought it was hilarious. There have been good things as well as bad things, though. About a year ago, my brother's best friend died in a car accident. Our family, especially my brother, were so distraught. My brother and I stayed up late the night he died and watched Monty Python to cheer us up. Then, I noticed somebody walking around our kitchen, grinning with the biggest smile I'd ever seen. I thought it was the poltergeist, so I told him to go away. My brother said, "I don't think it's the poltergeist." I stared at him and asked him how he knew. "I don't know," he said, "but I really don't think it's him." He told me to describe him. "Well," I said, He's wearing blue jeans, a white t-shirt, and he has the biggest smile I've ever seen. Jason stood up. Jason, is that you? It turned out that the ghost was my brother's best friend, Jason, that died in a car crash. We stopped the movie and talked for hours. Jason had to talk through me, though. Apparently, the only way a ghost can communicate to living people is through someone else. Anyway, presently, I talked to a ghost that came in about a month ago. Her name is Amelie, and her brother Jacob. Jason visits now and then, but I really don't see him as much as I used to. Well, that's my life. Helping out ghosts. Kinda weird, huh? But it all started out with a little ghost named Sam. This is for you, buddy. My name is Samantha, and I'm 18 years old. I have had a lot of unusual and scary things happen to my family and I, but I won't get into all of that. But what I will tell you is one story about something I had the unfortunate chance of meeting. This is my story. My family and I are gypsies, since we constantly move around and hardly stay in the same place. Mostly because of my dad, God rest his soul, wanted us to see the world. We lived in 17 different towns and cities altogether, but we sort of gave up on that since he died 7 years ago, and we moved a couple years later to Timmins, Ontario, which is located in northern Canada, which is only an hour and a half away from where we used to live. Anyway, I didn't get the greatest feeling from our 2-bedroom upstairs apartment. Not only was it on a bad street, but I felt something not good there. Right away, odd things happened, such as the rocking chair moment. There was this creepy old rocking chair from the 1970s already there, and it was put away in the inside porch with most of our belongings. I had an unnerving feeling, and I went to go see it. Right there from the doorway, it was rocking crookedly, which made it look even creepier. Then it stopped so suddenly, like it knew that I was watching. Then there's the attic. I always hear something walking around up there, and a loud thump, like it was jumping up and down. It was very cold up there, and I always avoided it. My mom even put a lock on the attic door, just in case. That was what she said. I didn't even know what that meant. I remember one night I was home alone waiting for my mom and sister to come home. I did not feel safe, even with all the lights on. I couldn't even sleep until they were home. I was in my room waiting on my bed. Then I heard the door open and someone walking around. I thought it was Mom, so I went to go look, and she wasn't there. The door was open, and I was alone. I used to wake up with scratches all over my body, some of them so deep, and I would be puzzled as to how they got there. I didn't even have a pet. Then there's the one night when I woke up in the middle of the night, feeling scared, and it was cold in my room, which was weird since I didn't have a window and I wasn't cold. It was just a room. I felt someone standing beside my bed looking down at me. My bed was practically floor level. I turned the other way and tried going back to bed. But that's when I felt someone's hot breath in my ear, and I heard it rasp. It was a man. I knew this. My heart stopped and I froze. I was scared. I couldn't sleep since. I knew it was a man. I had a dream of him. He was a Caucasian, weightly and tall guy, and he often tried to follow me in my dreams. He was angry and abusive, but he couldn't touch me once I got away from the apartment. I told my sister, and she also knew. We moved out of there the next summer, and we went back to Cochrane, and we stayed here ever since. We've had other spirits, but we didn't care. We were back to something familiar, and that was okay. I lived in a town in my hometown of Glendale, Arizona. It was on 59th Avenue in Peoria, less than a mile from 3 cemeteries and a dilapidated old barn house. Lots of creepy surroundings. My experiences aren't that riveting. The place was infested with cockroaches, and they never went away, no matter what we did. We did so many things as far as fogging. We let 30 geckos loose to eat them all. We put out roach traps. I've just heard about bugs in haunted places, flies and stuff, but it could have nothing to do with it. But also, there was 1.5 bathrooms in the place. The upstairs had 1 shower, and the downstairs just had a toilet and a sink. Well, one time I was in the bathroom, which is right beneath the stairs. As I was sitting on the toilet, I heard feet running up the stairs, like thunder, like someone was really hurrying to get up there. Then I came out of the bathroom and saw my boyfriend, and my roommate and I said, "Who ran upstairs all crazy?" And they said neither of them. I said, "Are you sure?" And they said, "Yeah, we've been sitting here the whole time." I asked if one of the 3 cats ran upstairs. The 2 girl cats are too small to have made that kind of noise, but our male cat was almost 20 pounds, so it was a possibility. But he was sitting beside my roommate. Also, the light used to turn on by itself, and in my boyfriend and my bedroom, the lock was on the outside, and it was a keyhole, as if somebody was locking someone in the room from the outside. One of our female cats went crazy and started to growl at us and attack my roommate. My dog was always barking at things when there was nothing for him to bark at. Very scary. Thank God I don't live there anymore. After sharing some particularly creepy paranormal experiences amongst ourselves, my brother, sister, and my sister's boyfriend and I decided to check out a couple of the places in the haunted places list that just happen to be located here in scenic Muskogee, Oklahoma. While searching for the address of 2119 Akoogie, we wound up on a street by the name of Callahan. A set of train tracks run across the road, and bells and crossing lights are in place to warn about oncoming trains. At around 2 a.m. in the morning, we started down the road. When we started, the warning lights were flashing, but they went off shortly, and we assumed a train had passed. But when we were coming up on the tracks, they began flashing again, and this time, the balls went off too. Our driver, my sister, slammed on the brakes, and we all started looking for the train. There wasn't one in sight. Lights went off for a few seconds later, so we just sat and waited, unsure of whether or not to continue across the tracks. Then the lights went off again. My sister sped in reverse to get away from the tracks. She was so freaked out. Her boyfriend finally talked her into going across the tracks, and when he did, my brother and I, felt extremely panicked. After that, we finally found her address, which is now an abandoned parking lot. The story says that you're supposed to hear 2 men talking in the backseat. What happened was that my left eardrum started hurting very badly, and I just got an overwhelming sense that something bad had happened. As we're pulling out of the parking lot, 2 lights went out. One right on the corner which the parking lot was on, and one diagonally across the street. We went through the parking lot once more, and once again my left ear started hurting. My brother said that his ears started ringing for about a second and stopped, and my sister's boyfriend said that he felt like he was on an airplane because his ears suddenly became stuffy. You probably won't think much of this, but it really freaked out my friend. Just read it before you judge it. It started with my friend's mom. His mom used to be a cleaner, you see, and she and her friend were cleaning this house when something happened. First, his mom and her friend were cleaning upstairs. They could always smell something really horrid downstairs, but whenever they went down, there was nothing there. This happened quite a few times. Then one day, my friend's mom was cleaning the wall when she felt something push her really hard on her shoulder. She was then off with shock. Her friend who cleaned with her didn't think it was true, but the next day it appeared to her as well. When my mom's friend was better, her and her friend went to the house next door, which was haunted, and they told the woman who lived there. This one, called Vanessa, went into the house, and as soon as she stepped upstairs, the smell stopped. It was almost as if she scared the ghost or thing off. I don't know what you think of this story, but I can guarantee you one thing. It is 100% real.
My first encounter with the spirit world inside of a funeral home took place back in 1999. I was a lowly funeral assistant back then whose duties involved greeting families, floor work at visitations and funerals, answering the phone, and cleaning. One night, I was working a visitation that caught me a little off guard. A small group of people arrived together for the visitation and requested it would be private. They informed us that no other attendees would be joining them and asked that we stay out of the parlor out of respect. This in itself was not uncommon, but what came next certainly was. The building began to smell of incense and candles, which they had brought in and burned, and we could hear them chanting in unison. We couldn't make out what they were chanting, but we were certain that it was not English. After approximately 20 minutes of this, they all simply left. They didn't tell us whether or not they were coming back, but as the visitation was scheduled for 3 or more hours, we just waited. No one returned. The next morning, it was my job to come in early, clean the funeral home up, turn all the lights on, and prepare for the funeral service that would begin later that morning. I arrived at the funeral home, through the garage, turned off the alarm, and put on my first pot of coffee of the day. I walked into the parlor that the people had been chanting in the night before and instantly felt a very heavy presence in the room. The air was thick, as though you could actually feel it rubbing against your skin as you walked. The smell of stale incense and burned candles was still present from the night before. I looked around to find that there was nothing to clean up or prepare, as the people had only been there for a short time. I turned the lights on around the funeral home and went back to the employee areas to begin feeding my caffeine addiction. After reading a portion of the daily newspaper and drinking a few or more cups of coffee, nature called. I didn't want to miss any phone calls inquiring about the morning's funeral service, or God forbid miss a family who walked into the funeral home, so I used the small employee restroom in the back of the funeral home and left the door open to listen. As I momentarily stood there taking care of business, I heard footsteps walking up the hallway towards me. I turned my head and saw a man in a suit walk by the doorway, turning his head to look at me as he walked by. I was humiliated. Here I was standing there using the restroom with the door open and a family walked in. I shouted, "I'm sorry, sir. I'll be with you in 1 second." I couldn't have possibly been more embarrassed. I quickly washed my hands and went out to meet him. I walked to the front of the funeral home and found nobody there. "Sir," I shouted, but nobody answered. I figured he must have gone back to his car to wait until the time of the funeral before returning, so I went to the front door to check the parking lot. I pushed the door and suddenly felt my stomach drop. The door was still locked. I had forgotten to unlock the funeral home when I arrived that morning, and it hadn't even occurred to me that I didn't hear the door chime from somebody walking in before seeing a man walk past me. There was simply no way that anyone could have been there other than me. And I most certainly didn't hallucinate what I had just seen. I wandered back into the parlor, though this time the air wasn't as thick or uncomfortable as it had been an hour or so prior. I was getting ready to walk out when something caught my attention. It was the blue suit white shirt, and red tie that the deceased gentleman in the casket had on. I walked up to the casket and froze when I looked at the man's face. His features, his hair, and his suit were unmistakable. This was the man who wandered down the hallway and turned to look at me as he passed. The funeral went on as planned, and after the director who made the arrangements with the family took the small procession to the cemetery, I told my boss what had happened. He only laughed, not adding anything to the conversation. I know he believed me, as I was noticeably shaken up, but we weren't supposed to talk about these things in this business, so he didn't. I have had several other paranormal occurrences in this line of work over the years, but none were as profound as that first one. My views on what happens to a spirit in the time following death were forever changed. I hope you enjoyed reading about this experience. I will share another story or two in the future. I very much appreciate your podcast, and I wish you well. Storage closet. There was a young, newly married couple named Lena and Michael who lived together in an old house. Michael worked as an accountant in a small company, and Lena was still a student at university. She was studying to be an interior designer. The young couple loved their new home and put a lot of effort into renovating and decorating. The house had a large living room, a kitchen, and 2 bedrooms. In the hallway, there was a storage closet that was filled with all sorts of old junk. By the way, the rooms were both really small. One evening, as usual, Lena was preparing the dinner and humming quietly to herself. Her husband was in the living room, lying on the couch and watching TV. He remembered that one of the lights in the bedroom had gone out, and he needed to replace the bulb. The walk-in storage closet in the hallway had cupboards and shelves. It was completely packed with paint cans, pieces of carpet, replacement door handles, cleaning products, candles, boxes of matches, and other stuff. The spare light bulbs were in a metal drawer with sharp corners. Michael was searching through the junk when he tripped over something on the ground and flew down with a crash. "Mike, you're so clumsy," Lena called from the kitchen. "Are you all right?" She heard the door to the storage room close. Yeah, I'm all right," said Michael. "I just stumbled over all this junk you keep in here." "Don't blame me," said Lena. "You're the one who decided to go poking around in there. I just wanted to replace the light bulbs in the bedroom. God damn it," Michael replied. "So go ahead," Lena snorted and continued to cook dinner. On Monday morning, when Lena woke up, Michael had already left for work. She took a shower, got dressed, and hurried off to university. When she came home that evening, Lena stopped at the front door of the house. Searching through her purse, she realized that she had forgotten her keys. The door was locked, and she didn't have any way to open it. Unfortunately, she had also forgotten to bring her mobile phone. She had to wait in front of her house for her husband to come home. She waited and waited, but Michael never showed up. It was getting dark, and Lena began to wonder what happened to him. In frustration, she banged on the door with her fists. All of a sudden, she heard a click, and the door creaked open. She walked into the hallway, closed the door behind her, and wearily dropped her backpack on the floor. When Lena looked into the living room, she stopped in her tracks. Her husband was sitting on the couch, watching TV. "You mean you were here all this time?" Lena asked, annoyed. Michael simply glared up at her and smiled. Just then, something caught Lena's attention. "What's that smell?" she asked. "I don't smell anything," her husband replied. Lena wandered around the house, sniffing and looking for the source of the putrid smell. The smell was strongest in the hallway. It was so unpleasant it made her nauseous. The door of the storage closet was ajar. Lena reached out, grasped the handle and pulled the door open. She saw something that made her want to scream. Lying on the floor of the storage closet, surrounded by old junk, was the dead body of her husband, Michael. He had hit his head on the sharp corner of the metal drawer and bled to death. As she stared in horror, Lena heard the voice of her husband behind her asking, "What's wrong, honey?"
Hey guys, and if you're not a guy, I'm sorry for misgendering you, but me and my cat are very apologetic and we believe in the sincerity of good nature of humankind. Anyway, I don't know why I said that. Please leave a like, a share, and a subscribe. It really helps the channel grow if you share the video and helps the algorithm. And I hope you enjoyed this compilation. So if you got to the end of this compilation, please write in the channel below, because this is my channel, obviously. It's ours that we built together. Blue Snowball. I'm not recording with this Blue Snowball. I'm recording with a Yeti. Not like the abominable snowman, but you know, that one thing that people use the mic. It's not a mythical creature. But if you want to see mythical creatures in the comments below, let me know that you want mythical creatures to exist. I can't do anything about that, obviously. Creatures don't actually exist unless, you know, it's reality. So whether or not there will be creatures that exist in this universe is up to the heavens above. Okay, guys, love you. I'll see you in the next video. Don't forget to comment, like, and share.